Well, boys,
Do it to it.
here we are. This is the election episode.
Yeah. For people who might not be in Alberta, we are on the eve of a provincial election in this province. And it's too close to call right now, I think, as the latest polls are.
Yeah, it depends on the polls you go to, right? Mainstream, the director of mainstream polling said that he would not just eat his hat if there was not an NDP majority. He would eat two hats.
Huh.
I believe he said that earlier this week.
Oh, wow.
Whereas Janet Brown's polling and Abacus are calling for a UCP majority. So
who's the head of the mainstream?
mainstream media, I forget his name, to be honest. Shogi, something to that effect. Mainstream, I have found, is usually pretty good. Like they were the first polling firm that I recall that predicted the NDP victory in 2015.
Okay.
They were the first ones to do that, and they were pretty good federally. However, they really dropped the ball in Alberta in 2019.
Yeah.
They massively overestimated NDP support. I mean, just going over the homework, you remember last time in 2019, the polls had the NDP and the UCP neck and neck right up to election day. It was too close to call. But when it all shook out, the UCP had 50.02% of the popular vote in 63 seats, whereas the NDP and the Alberta Party combined had 42.85% and only 24 seats.
Yeah,
So-
how many of those seats were Alberta Party? Probably none.
None.
Yeah.
None. I've counted them like in the 2012 and the 2019 elections. I've counted them kind of as combined for their popular vote because they're drawing from the same constituency, really. I don't think there's a lot of swing from Alberta Party to UCP. I think the Alberta Party got most of its support from people who were opposed to the UCP, but not completely comfortable with the more radical side of the NDP.
So the obvious question for me is, in both those years, what percentage of that 48% was Alberta Party versus NDP?
In 2019, 2.23% was Alberta Party, 40.62% was NDP. In 2012, the Alberta Party had 1.31% compared to 9.85% for the NDP.
We should probably lay a little groundwork again for people who may not be in Alberta. The UCP is the United Conservative Party, formerly just the Conservative Party, but then there was an amalgamation between a breakaway conservative movement called the Wild Rose Party, and it became, when they reunited, it became the United Conservative Party. The NDP is the New Democratic Party, and it is the primary left-wing party in the province. And for what it's worth, again, if you're not from Alberta, the UCP has essentially been the governing party in the province with one interruption for about 60 years.
Pretty much since 1971.
Yeah, with other than the one interruption in 2019?
15 to 19.
15 to 19, sorry.
Yeah. That something that should be pointed out, again, for folks not necessarily in Alberta or even in Canada, is that Canadian provincial politics tends toward dynasties. That most Canadian provinces tend to have parties that form 3, 4, 5 majorities in a row.
Yep.
That this is the norm in Canadian provincial politics. For example, Alberta first became a province in 1905. From 1905 to 1921, it was governed by the Liberal Party. From 1921 or 22 on into, I think, 32, 33, it was governed by the United Farmers of Alberta. The United Farmers movement was an agrarian party that had several branches. There was the United Farmers of Ontario, UFA. I think there was the United Farmers of Manitoba. It was at a product of a time when agriculture was a major economic force and employed a lot of people. Then in the Depression, it was turfed out by the Social Credit Party, which was a economically social credit is difficult to place on the spectrum. Economically, left-wing, socially very conservative. And they governed from 32 right until 1970 in a very long dynasty. But again, this was norm. This was the norm for Canadian politics at the time.
Well, it's certainly the norm for Alberta politics.
Well,
No, I mean, we'll look at the
even British Columbia, right? Like
Yep.
British Columbia was so cred for probably
Decades.
1970 until the end of the Socreds in British
Quebec
Columbia.
was run by the Union Nationale and Maurice Duplessis from the 20s on into right up until the late 60s, in a dynasty of almost the same length of time. The Ontario Tories under Bill Davis
Yeah, Davis had a long
for
tenure.
decades.
Yeah.
The Saskatchewan NDP
for a long time.
ruled
Until,
for decades, literally right from the 1930s up into when did the Saskatchewan Party finally crack that? After the millennia?
oh yeah, no, it was like
They're
that's
on almost an 80-year dynasty.
yeah, like the Saskatchewan Party, I think, is on their third term right now.
Yeah. So this is we like to think of Alberta being dynastic. No, provincial politics is very dynastic.
Yeah.
Probably the most highest turnover is in the Maritimes, where like I only got 2 terms in a row. Like what the hell are those guys?
Yeah, I like.
They change their governments like they change their socks. My God, every 8 years. What the hell? You know.
Yeah.
So
But I was even going to point out that like since the fall of the Social Credit Party in the BC, they've been ruled by the NDP uninterrupted, and that would happen in the late 1990s, I think. So
what was that?
the BC has been
Oh, yeah.
essentially ruled by the NDP.
Yeah.
Since the end of the Socreds, and
Yeah.
that was like I said, mid to late 1990s when the Socreds
Yes.
dissolved.
Yeah. They kind of collapsed. Yeah.
Well, the leader I think got indicted. I think he might have gone to jail. Bill Van der Zam.
Yeah. I think he might have. Yeah. He might have. So.
I mean, that's been happening a lot since late 80s, early 90s.
What's that? Politicians going to jail?
No,
Not really.
but you'll have a party that kind of implodes for a while.
Yeah.
Right? We had that in 2015 up until 6 months before the election. The Liberals had crapped the bed so bad previously that no one was looking at them. It was only Trudeau the Younger who came in and kind of turned that around and pulled the carpet from under the feet of the New Democrats.
They were certainly, I would say, like the Liberals were kind of moribund in that period. Like after Chrétien stepped down, they really didn't have a deep bench. Like they went through Michael Ignatieff. There was another fellow before him, a francophone, who tried to run on very green credentials. He wasn't a very strong leader. He's a strong leader, I should say, a strong personality. He wasn't very dynamic. And of course, they had the misfortune of coming across probably the most competent federal conservative leader of the past 80 years. Well, certainly since oh my God, Borden.
Yeah.
In Stephen Harper. And he ate them for lunch.
You don't think Diefenbaker was up there?
No, I think Diefenbaker was actually quite incompetent. Had it not been for the spat between Union Nationale and the federal Liberals, Diefenbaker never would have been elected. Without his Quebec caucus, he never would have even come within a cab ride of a majority. And that's why he only lasted that one term, because Duplessis simply wanted to send a message to the federal Liberals as to who's really in charge. And so, of course, the federal Liberals mended fences. Quebec swung, like the UN machine stayed home on the next federal election, and Quebecers swung en masse back to the Liberal Party, and the Conservatives went back into the wilderness.
Interesting. Sorry, we digress there.
No, not at all. It's all in there. So that was a big... Stéphane Dion.
Right.
That was the name of the guy.
Yep.
So, the Liberal bench was not deep at the time.
Well, my impression was, I can't even remember, was Martin after or before Chrétien?
After. He took over from Chrétien.
And there was also a real rift within the Liberal Party.
Well, not just that. I think I seem to remember the public perception was that it was just, after those two governments, there was just, it was the corruption that had come out. The same way that the Tory party had kind of imploded for a while after Mulroney. Same thing happened after Chrétien and Martin with the Liberals. And that's why we had what we had in 2015.
Well, I think part of the problem with a party with a really, really strong leader is that sometimes these leaders have a tendency to discourage a succession plan in order to cement their own power. And Pierre Trudeau was very much one of those leaders. He always wanted to cement his hold, and so he liked to keep his subordinates scrapping underneath him, so in order to keep his position secure. So that when he stepped down, there was no succession plan. There was no, when he went for his walk in the snow, there was no one who was able to take over. And the party was deeply divided between the Chrétien camp and the John Turner camp. And then the John Turner camp moved to Paul Martin. And then that rift really weakened the Liberal effort. They weren't a unified group until Justin Trudeau.
Yeah.
You know, I think they were unified by the time Michael Ignatieff came around. After like the first, there's a certain, and I think this was also in the Alberta Progressive Conservatives in 2015. There's a certain disbelief. Like, we've been in power for so long, we cannot possibly lose. There's just a disbelief that the worst could actually happen. Then all of a sudden, it does.
Well, I think two
And
things.
then it galvanizes the party members. And then they say, okay, put aside our petty differences. The external threat is greater. Stephen Harper is the greater threat. They were all behind guys like Ignatieff. He just wasn't the man of the hour.
He was a carpetbagger.
Yeah, I mean, I have nothing against Ignatieff as a person. Like, I don't find him despicable. I don't think he's a villain. He just wasn't the kind of guy who could really excite the electorate.
Yeah.
Not like a Justin Trudeau could.
No, he was an intellectual.
I think
He wasn't even a politician, right? He
Yeah.
came in, and I don't think he even had a seat.
No, he didn't. He
did
didn't,
not.
because he literally moved up to take the leadership because he was still, I think, teaching at Harvard.
Yes.
Right up until after he won the leadership.
Yep.
And then moved up, and then eventually got a seat, and then, yeah. I don't know. I kind of feel like Michael Ignatieff was like Canada's John Kerry.
Kind of. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Without the military service. But,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But kind of that boring,
Yeah.
droll.
Yeah. He wasn't exciting.
No.
He wasn't exciting. And I think the Liberal Party united behind him because he was all they had.
Yeah.
But their bench was not deep.
No.
Well, again, and I still emphasize it. I think it was a corruption thing. Like that they had lost the faith of the electorate.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what
yeah.
was playing out until Trudeau came up the middle and just stole all the votes.
And that has, like, there was...
Well, he didn't come up the middle. He came up the left.
There were... Yeah.
No, he literally came up the left wing,
he
right?
came up the left wing, yes.
Because
he did out
Trudeau's, the key to Trudeau's success is
Yes.
siphoning all those left-wing voters off the NDP.
Yeah, totally.
Right? That's the
Yeah,
key.
but we knew a lot
But
of those
you're
voters
talking-
they were already Liberal voters who had gone NDP
Yeah.
because they had a distaste for the Liberals. And
Yes.
they leveraged Trudeau's name. And he created that, this second wave of Trudeau mania.
Yeah.
Because juxtaposed against I can't even remember who the Tory was in that election.
Geez.
It was
well,
against Harper again?
the first one was against Harper. The second was Andrew Hu.
Yeah.
And then the third one was...
Yeah.
Okay, but it was against Harper.
Yeah.
Right? But that was a gimme because
Yeah.
Yeah, the Tories had been in...
They were tired. And it is almost impossible. Like, it is incredibly rare in Westminster parliaments to win three or to win more than 3 terms.
Yeah, to win more than 3. Yeah.
Well, and by
It's
then Harper,
incredibly rare.
the perception of Harper, as we've discussed many times, is he was so freaking arrogant that he united the country against him.
Well,
Right?
and the media campaign against him had finally begun to bear fruit.
Yeah.
Because when you see him in his public appearances, he is so unlike the way he was portrayed. He was portrayed as a tyrant, portrayed as a dictator, as a short-tempered, angry man, a very dislikable fellow, like the Hogue effect. Heck of a guy. conservative vote bases are more receptive to a politician who is perceived as being someone you'd want to invite to a backyard barbecue. Whereas progressive vote bases that holds no appeal. Someone who would fit in better at a wine and cheese tends to appeal more to the progressive vote base. That media campaign alienated Harper from that vote base. And that's what it was intended to do. Well, it was very effective.
So I don't know. I have a couple of responses to that because that was my impression. So on the one hand, is it accurate to call it a media campaign against him? Because that implies that it wasn't accurate. Like,
yes,
what may or may not have been accurate about? Because on an issue by issue basis, I remember things coming up, and I looked at, what was being discussed and what was being said about it, and as separate issues, I found them distasteful.
Like what?
The one that specifically comes. The specific one that comes to mind is the shutting down of science.
The muzzling of the scientists.
Yes.
I was hoping you were going to mention that.
The other one was just across the board that he didn't tolerate any dissension.
Right, that he was a tyrant, that he was a dictator within caucus.
Right.
Which is completely and totally inaccurate.
So before we get into a debate about that, whether we do or not, because we're supposed to be, eventually we'll get back to the Alberta bit.
The provincial election.
Yes, right? Yes. Well, we're setting the table here. We're setting the table.
But I think on the other hand is to be a successful politician, if that's how it's going to play out, then you've messed up, right? He allowed himself to be portrayed that way and he didn't successfully counter that, right? So
they were also conservative politicians at the time. And this is something conservative politicians are dealing with still today. It's still an issue. But I think they have more tools in the toolbox to counter it. They had no alternative to the left-wing monopoly on the information space, on the media space. And the CBC and Global and the entire media network that Global is a part of, including print and whatnot, was a massive left-wing monolith that was working character assassination against them. Harper was, I remember at the time, the term Harper derangement syndrome.
Yep.
Where Harper was portrayed as evil incarnate. Now, you mentioned the muzzling of the scientists. This was the buzzword that was muzzling, was seen across media platforms. This is why it's really hard to argue there's no left-wing media collusion when every single outlet uses the same planned language. But that policy has not changed. That exact policy has not changed in what are we talking now? 10 years? A decade?
A liberal government? Decade, yep.
Decade of liberal government. That policy has not been changed. Has there been a single word in the CBC or Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, Montreal Gazette, CBC Radio about, hey man, they're still muzzling scientists? No, the issue went away. It was a temporary propaganda point for character assassination. It was a fabricated issue.
So here's where I went, as you said, all these things. So we've been down this, or I've been down this road internally when we sat down before, right? Like the whole concept of, this mainstream media conspiracy. On the one hand, I find it curious because I always think of Global as the National Post in the same way. Very right of center.
Global.
Now, I might be going back to the 80s and 90s here, but
you would have to.
You'd have to.
In the 80s and 90s, Global didn't exist until the late 90s.
Global was ITV back.
It was ITV, and it was literally independent.
Yeah, it was independent.
That's what it stood for. It was independent television.
Yeah.
So, and ITV, it was literally only Edmonton and Calgary. Did they?
Yeah.
No, I don't think. Did they broadcast in Calgary?
I think they were Edmonton only.
But anyway, they were owned by George Allard. The guy's name was Allard anyway.
Yeah.
The place where the studio is called Allard Way over on the south side by.
Yeah.
By Super.
Another thing, like, specific to the, are we talking about muzzling of scientists anymore? No. As a specific issue, no. Oh shit! Short-term memory loss. Fuck.
Well, anyway, like, just my point is that it was the media very much has for pretty obviously now since the 1970s, and becoming more egregiously more so with each election cycle.
Okay.
The media is no longer on the sidelines commenting on the events. They are active participants in the field.
Yeah, but
deliberately attempting to sway the vote.
First of all, to me that applies in both directions, right? I see that shit from the National Post all the time, right?
Sure,
I'll
except it's predominantly overwhelming favoring the left.
Of the ones that you listed, CBC Radio, CBC Mainstream, Globe and Mail,
it's a shorter
Toronto
list.
Star. I haven't seen anything from the Montreal Gazette lately, but of all of those that you just named, I have seen more than one article from each of them in the last 1 to 2 years that call out the Trudeau government.
Oh, sure. And it was Global that broke the story of Trudeau actually surfing into Fino during Native Reconciliation Day.
Yeah.
However, when the election kicks in, when the writ is dropped, these media outlets are four square behind the lead Progressive Party. It's a much shorter list to say, okay, who's not? Financial Post, National Post, Sunchain. That's it. You want your right-wing media? There you go.
No, I agree. And
Otherwise, new media is the battle. And this is where I said that guys like Harper didn't have a counter to the leftist control of the information space. That is kind of changing now. And the Alberta election, and just to kind of, foreshadow something I'd like to talk to you about today. The Alberta election, I think, is a very radical, or not radical, but say a significant deviation from that previous pattern, where I think the United Conservatives have made aggressive use of new media. They're not trying to, like, how you said, look, Harper kind of screwed up because he wasn't able to successfully counter that character assassination in the mainstream media. The Smith Conservatives have abandoned mainstream media. And I think what we're seeing now is, for example, something done very skillfully by the federal Conservatives is to portray or to call out the legacy media as being biased, as being a progressive talk shop. So when the CBC makes a criticism of the federal Liberals, right there in the press conference, Poilievre says, well, look at you, consider the source. Of course you're sandbagging for your buddies in the Liberal Party. Dismissing, but it's effective. It is effective because it puts the seed of doubt in the electorate's mind to say, so next time, for example, the CBC has pulled out all the stops in going after Danielle Smith in this campaign. They have been, the only competitor is maybe, who's that guy who writes for the Globe and Mail on Alberta politics? It's basically called, Smith Everything Between the Wicked Witch and Martin Bowman. And basically Albertans are a bunch of redneck, ignorant hicks if they vote for her again, and blah, 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 blah.
I mean, that attitude is everywhere in this country, right? Outside of Alberta.
In the past, people have looked at that and said, well, I don't know, maybe there's something to that. 15, 20 years ago, certainly. Today, with this counter message being launched through new media, number one, conservative messaging can get across without the filters of the mainstream media. Second, people now look at these, not everyone, but some people. Now, I don't know what the percentage is. We're going to find out on Monday. Some people are able to look at this biased coverage and say, well, is that true? Or is that just the CBC? Is that true? Or is that just global? So it puts the seed of doubt where the information space is no longer a progressive monopoly. That's what makes this election different than say in previous contests.
I have so many bullet points to throw onto the same page. They're all
It's yours,
interrelated,
buddy. Have at her.
Right. So first of all, I have a huge problem with the way society has been polarized across the board in so many ways, and it's the loudest voices and stuff like that. I don't like, and this comes from the whole fake news bullshit, right? So now all of a sudden everyone has to question everything, right? And now we're demonizing the quote unquote mainstream media. There's a lot of things that came out of your mouth there that I find are very lopsided, right? You're accusing the left of control of the media, of demagoguery.
Totally. Yeah.
Well, what you got
demagoguery, I'm not going to criticize them for because that's politics. Politics is demagoguery. However, biased use of the media, absolutely, I'll criticize them for that.
But you get the same thing coming out of the National Post.
Okay,
right?
like three outlets. If we're going to talk about what's on the other side of the fence, man, I would need 15 minutes to name all of them off. Like the weight of traffic.
My whole point is
the other thing, before we go any further, it should be noted, it's essential to this, that these outlets, which are so outrageously biased, have always presented themselves as unbiased. They have always tried to say, oh, no, we're professional journalists. We are above the fray. We're not taking sides when they so clearly are. It was, have you seen the CBC vote compass for the Alberta election? How they're portraying the NDP as centrist. Seriously?
Okay, so this brings me to another point, right? And again, I feel like sometimes having a conversation with you guys is like playing chess with the devil, right? Because, it's like, okay, you've made a point, but here, I'm gonna move the chessboard around here
to address that point.
Now we're gonna talk this other thing, right? Again, you want to talk. What do you call it? You called it Harper derangement syndrome, right? Okay, I see that all the time from the other side.
Oh yes,
right?
yes.
Notley derangement syndrome, Trudeau derangement.
Well, I would
syndrome,
definitely say
right?
with Trudeau derangement syndrome,
right? And I get it, right? Because I have a massive distaste for the Trudeau Liberal government right now, right? And it's gotten to the point where my choice is either left of right or right of that. Right, I will not vote for that party. Federally.
Well, hold on. Couldn't you vote for, say, federal NDP?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, or
federally.
Greens.
Federally.
Like I don't.
The Greens. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole right now.
You don't like federal
But what I'm saying, let's get back to the derangement syndrome.
That's something
right?
I want to do a episode on someday.
Yeah.
Okay, but anyway,
but
go
I
on,
mean,
go on.
the derangement syndrome, like the Notley thing, right? Let's say. On social media, on Facebook, I've got plenty of friends on Facebook, ex-members of the regiment, current members of the regiment, right? And there's this whole presentation of, Notley being lapdog to Jive Make It Sing.
Yes.
And Pierre Trudeau.
Which has been a major talking point of the UCP in this election.
And again, to me, that's just, I'm not going to pay attention to that, right? If you've got an issue, fucking talk to me about an issue, right?
Well,
if you just want to portray her as this, that, and the other thing, I have a huge problem. Like I'd happily discuss the merits of Danielle Smith,
right,
and the UCP, or the history of the Tory party in this province.
That is kind of the issue there. Like I'm going to be devil's advocate on that.
Yeah.
Okay. They are trying to portray the notion, or they're trying to put out there that the provincial NDP does not have full sovereignty in policy, that the federal party can overrule provincial policy. So that it's basically saying that the Notley or an Alberta NDP government would not be free to fully advocate on behalf of Albertans and must subjugate their policy initiatives to align with the federal party.
I'm going to look into that because I seem to remember, and we're going back to the 80s under Grant Notley, that the provincial party here specifically went to the shortened version of the name ND, not NDP, to officially dissociate themselves from the federal party. Right?
Was that branding, or did they
That's what I'm going to look into, right? But I think that was important. And again, I get that, from the quote unquote right, I hesitate to use that term because we've had so many discussions about that. But if you want to talk to me about the one-term tenure of Rachel Notley as a premier,
Yeah.
on an issue-by-issue basis, that's great, right? Let's have that conversation, right? If anyone's going to come to me and say she was just a disaster for this province, this is what I hear is, I don't like the NDP, I'll never like the NDP, and therefore I'm just going to portray Rachel Notley as a disaster for the province, right? With no other reason for doing that.
There was, I think that is probably the biggest single challenge for the NDP in this campaign.
Yeah.
Is they are what I know they've tried to avoid it, strenuously tried to avoid it, and I think that's good policy. But the memory of their term in office, which was disastrous, is still very fresh in the minds of the electorate. It's not, this is where their inability, they are the only government in Alberta history to only have one term. And this is a handicap to them because, say, when you've got, when you have a dynastic system, the same party stays in power, but you often have change up of leaders. So it allows the incumbent party to kind of refresh.
Yeah.
For example, the progressive Conservatives, near the end, as happens with these dynastic systems, they get very moribund. And then after, I believe, Klein, then you went into Stelmach.
Yeah.
And then you went into...
No. Stelmach was before Klein. Stelmach was
No,
after.
he was after. He was
it
after.
went Lougheed, Getty, Stelmach.
Nope. Klein was in there. Stelmach was after.
Really?
Yep. And he was very uninspiring. And then you had
maybe
Alison
you're right.
Redford, who was disastrous.
Okay. So
She was terrible.
whole bunch of things you said all
Yeah.
tie together here for me.
And
all right?
then Redford won her election handily, but so badly mismanaged the province that she would have got crushed had she gone into the polls. And then I believe it was Jim Prentice,
Yes.
who took over. And this happens a lot, and it allows, like, look at the who we talked about, how Lougheed wore out his welcome. Getty took over, was not doing well. He would have lost if he had gone against Lawrence Decore. I am certain of that. But then Ralph Klein came in, refreshed the party, gave them a new lease on life, and extended that dynasty again. By the time you get to somebody like Ed Stelmach, who's just not that exciting, who's just not that inspiring, the opposition points out to the many years of mistakes and detritus that builds up over a government. We say, well, that was somebody else. That wasn't us. That was Getty.
I think
that was you know what I mean? It's far enough in the past.
Yeah.
The NDP didn't get enough time in office to get that refresh.
Well, that's the whole point. So you said they've only had one term in
They only
office.
had-
And
yeah,
I'm kind
and
of
it
like,
was, and it was only 4 years ago.
and this is where I feel, again, it's like playing chess with the devil. Oh, okay, so they didn't.
Yeah.
Right? So you're going to hold that against them.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So...
Well, because it's the same leader, and it's largely the same candidates. They didn't really you look at like Hoffman, CC,
Yeah.
the main characters, Loyola, the main characters
David
the main characters in that cabinet are still there. They didn't get a refresh of their caucus.
So they were democratically elected out. Okay, so that's the system, right?
Sure.
When it comes to...
And we know how they're going to perform because we know what they did last time.
Okay, let's not argue about the performance just yet. All
Okay.
right. So I would say that, if I'm looking at any government coming in, right, I want people with experience. So
Fair.
I think that's
Fair.
we've got an experienced leader. You want to talk about dynasty? The Notley name means a lot in this province, right? For the NDs, that's all
For the
they got.
NDs, it does. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Hells bells. Fuck, I hate getting old.
Just on your point about having experience, this was a criticism of the NDP government while it was in office in that they had no experience. Yeah. And to be honest, I do think it did show in like the number one example that comes to mind is the negotiation of the power contracts in switching from coal, transitioning out of the coal-fired plants into natural gas. The NDP government did get fleeced by, I think you could tell that they simply did not have the experience in government and business, and they got taken to the cleaners in those negotiations.
By the coal industry?
Yeah. Yeah. I think
so again, you're like, okay.
They got fleeced.
So,
yeah. But it was just...
You're looking at the ND government, you're saying, okay, they're damned if they do, damned
no,
if they don't.
No,
right?
that's
because
not... Don't misinterpret what I'm saying. They wouldn't get... Like, that's the kind of... Once you've learned that lesson, you've learned that lesson.
Yeah.
I don't think that would happen to them again. In that you learn by making mistakes, right? You learn by... you learn better by doing than, I guess, by being told.
Yeah.
So I don't think you would have that same issue with the NDP if they got in again. I think they would be better in how they introduce legislation.
Yeah.
For example, their bill, I believe it was the Farm Bill, the Farm Labor Bill.
No, we know the Farm Labor Bill. That's going to hang around their necks for a while.
Yeah, and that was, I think, a real example of inexperience.
Yeah.
Not just inexperience in government, inexperience in life. In that overwhelmingly, the NDP caucus was drawn from exclusively two sources, academia and the public sector. Mm-hmm. And so they didn't have the kind of experience that you get from a caucus where you've got people from all walks of life. And that kind of hamstrung the NDP.
Well, I don't think you do get it from all walks of life. When you get it from the right, typically you're getting it from either the business sector or the legal profession, right?
You get from... 3 sectors, maybe 4. You do get big business, but you also get small business entrepreneurs. You also get from the legal profession. You also get from a specific type, even backbenchers, but it counts. It counts. They have a voice in caucus.
But not in cabinet.
Doesn't matter. They're not in cabinet, but they still have that influence in caucus. And what happens in caucus dictates what happens in cabinet.
No.
And then the last constituency is the small entrepreneurs who came up from the working class. And that is very prominent within UCP as represented from the oil and gas sector. So you had a bit more diversity of thought and a bit more diversity of opinion in, say, the social credit government and then the PC government on up into today. The NDP... Had they had more time, had they the chance to form a dynasty of their own, I think that would have naturally broadened.
Yeah.
But it's just that one moment in time in 2015. I mean, again, they were often called the accidental government. Nobody can look me in the eye and say in 2014 they predicted an NDP government.
No.
It was a perfect combination of factors that came together to create that incredibly dynamic campaign. And the gaffes, also by Prentice.
Okay, so let's...
it was twofold. The NDP ran a solid campaign.
So
and the Conservatives were terrible.
I'm going to ask... Okay, I'm going to spew a whole bunch of things.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you not to respond to any of them.
Okay.
And in return, I'm going to...
Can't do it. Let's make bets. Let's make bets on
well, here's another thing that can't be done.
You got to put a time limit on it then.
I'm going to try it within 2, 3, 4 minutes.
Okay, 4 minutes. Right? 4 minutes.
Okay. Should I go downstairs and get some gun tape and put it on Facebook?
Or put a timer on here, like a chess timer.
And the other thing is, I got to collect my thoughts here. I managed to get through all this stuff, right? But I'm going to start with what to me is a glaring irony of okay, let's shit on the NDs for getting fleeced by the private sector, a major industry in this province. I mean, for fuck's sake, really, you're going to throw that at them?
Yeah,
right. How is that? It's good for capitalism if the coal industry gets something out of the deal, and that's less government on the coal industry, right? So I find that I'm actually laughing at that. Like, okay, fine, great, let's go with that. You're absolutely right. In 2014, it was a perfect storm, and you're right there, the accidental government. And as soon as they won that government, that election, I was kind of like, okay, they need to understand that, this is not a gimme for the next election. They're going to have a huge challenge.
Yep.
Because you're right. So Redford came in, and I feel she got a bit of a short straw. On the one hand, she was corrupt as fuck.
Oh, she was awful.
Right? But
Man.
hey,
Can you
hang on.
name-
No, you're cutting into my 4
Well,
minutes.
I'm agreeing with you. I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, but you're
Can
still
you
cutting into my
name
4
me?
minutes.
I'll grant you this time. A single provincial politician anywhere in any province at any time who is more corrupt than Redford? I can't.
We'll come back to that.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. I do, however, feel that she got the short straw to a certain extent in that there was at the same time, there was a Kim Campbell factor playing into that. Like, everyone was ready to hang her out to dry just because she was a woman. All right.
Oh,
I've
okay.
said it.
Okay.
Right. Jim Prentice came in next.
Yep.
And he shit the bed by telling people they had to look in the mirror. Now, at most times, I will agree with that sentiment that Albertans should look in the mirror. But he fucked up that message. He should have presented that a lot better. And so he lost people. People basically said, who the fuck are you to say that to me?
To clarify, what do you think that message actually was?
I don't know.
No, I mean, like, what do you think? Like, if you said,
I think
normally you might agree with it, on what terms would you agree with it?
He was basically, I can't even remember, but he was basically trying to challenge Albertans, which a leader should be able to effectively do, right? But he just pissed people off, and so that's part of why the Tories lost the election. But the other thing was the Wild Rose, and that's why we have a UCP today. Right. So coming into the 2019 election,
I have data on that.
all those things changed, right? So
You got a
Yeah.
pen I could borrow? This thing's dying. Thanks, buddy.
I guess I'm gonna have to. Just another thing again.
Still got a minute and a half, buddy.
Across the board. The whole mainstream media. You complain about things that what I'll liberally call your side does the same, right? And then you want to talk about market and capitalism, stuff like that. Okay, let's take a look at the fact. Okay, you've got the quote unquote mainstream media that you find is perpetuating this message that you find lacks integrity, right? Well, let's take a look at the fact, and we've had this conversation in other ways too. Like, I keep saying, if you want to win politics as a conservative, particularly federally, in this country, right? Well, no, it's like, okay, if your platform is distasteful to a majority of the people, you're not going to get in, right? Same thing. If the majority of the quote unquote distasteful, lacking in integrity mainstream media is perpetuating a certain message, and yet it is successful media, it is perpetuating that message to a willing audience, right? Which again speaks to the fact that a majority of the population wants to hear this. Right now we get into a chicken and egg conversation, right? But that exists on both sides, right? So, again, if you want to have what most centrists are considered extreme policies, then that's great. You get 11 out of 10 for integrity, for perpetuating your message. But if it's a message not everyone wants to hear, then good luck with that.
I'll go to the low-hanging fruit first. You were talking about how the Wild Rose was a factor in 2015.
Absolutely.
In 2015, in the election, the NDP got 40.62% of the vote, 54 seats. Mm-hmm. The Wild Rose and the Wild Rose got 24.22%. The PCs got 27.79% for a total of 52.01%.
Yeah.
So that was vote splitting was absolutely a factor
Yeah.
in that election, where in terms of popular vote, you had the progressive vote at 40%, and then you had a 52% on the conservative side, just to put it into two broad counts.
Well, yeah.
So yeah, that was absolutely a factor, and that's something that I think should be considered, even in this time period of, let's say, a resurgence of the NDP and consolidation of the progressive vote under the orange banner. I have not seen the evidence. Although the progressive vote is growing in the urban centers, I'm still not prepared to say it's as tight as the media commonly portrays it. Now, as for going to the coal industry fleecing the NDP government, okay, don't misrepresent what I'm saying. The coal industry, or any industry that's negotiating with the government, is going to emphatically pursue its own self-interest. Doesn't matter who is in government. It could have the most pro-business, business-friendly, capitalist-friendly government on the spectrum, and whatever industry, be it the auto industry, the coal industry, the internet, telecommunications, whoever, they're going to viciously pursue their own interests as emphatically as they can. Okay, so that is a given. I am not celebrating that as saying that, yeah, stick it to the NDP. I'm just saying that was they didn't have the acumen or the experience. They were kind of coming into those negotiations. Maybe they got a little blindsided. Mm-hmm. You know, they didn't realize they hadn't had any experience in doing that. And so that, I think, was an example of a mistake that was made just out of inexperience. And it could have happened to anybody. It didn't happen to them because they were the NDP. It happened to them because they were new to the business of government.
And inexperienced.
It could just as easily have happened to the Lougheed Tories in 1972, 1973, when they were brand new, had never been in government before, and if we look back in history, probably did. Because that was one of the things that Lougheed used to outflank
the Socreds.
The Socreds. It wasn't Manning. Manning had stepped down, and they had a new guy who had a Scandinavian last name, and he was duller in ditch water. And that's why kind of Lougheed, with his new dynamism, talking about revitalizing the oil and gas industry. I can't remember his name. But anyway, Lougheed came in promising to completely, renegotiate everything and really get oil and gas to work for Albertans. I have no doubt that those early PCs probably got fleeced by the oil companies in that early round of negotiations for the exact same reason. So as for the look in the mirror comment, the way I interpreted that was he was saying that, look, we can't live beyond our means. We as a province got used to the flush cash of high energy royalties, inflating our budget, so we had lots of money to spend on anything we wanted. And now that the oil price has gone down, now we've got to tighten our belts a little bit. We can't have the same sense of entitlement that we did before.
I agree. I think you're right.
That's what he wanted to say.
That's what the message.
But it was so poorly articulated.
Yeah, it was poorly done. And
yeah.
I would say actually, Klein set him up for failure in that way, because Klein had the big budget, and he kind of said to everyone, "Okay, here's your $400 or $700 or whatever it was." Right?
Yeah, Klein bucks.
So yeah, and the time wasn't right because.
What do you mean it wasn't right?
It should have been right, but we can't be self-entitled, right? I mean, that is a message that people need to hear.
Yeah, that we need.
But he did not pull it off. People did not want to hear it, right?
And I think the Notley skillfully, very, very skillfully exploited that because it came across as an insult to people when it had it been better articulated.
Well,
it might have
think
come across very
especially
differently.
coming off the corruption of the Redfern years.
This is true.
Right?
This is very true.
So that I think that was the kicker. Everyone's like, "Really? That's
It's like
that's what you're going with."
Yeah, it's like, okay, we've got fat and sassy at the trough for years, but now that our bed's made, now we got to tighten our belts, people. You're like, yeah, right.
And
it was bad timing.
coming back to one of the other things you said about the NDs and being subservient to the National Party, I don't see that. And say what you will about the other things that Notley did when she was in office, but when she was in office, that's when the Trans Mountain became a big deal, right? And I was quite happy to see that she actually, in my opinion, stood up for Alberta. She stood up to the federal government. She stood up to the BC NDP. And she put through a piece of legislation, which I was very happy to see, and that the UCP hasn't even used since then, which was to say, fuck you, BC.
Like, in other words, shut off exports to the Burnaby refinery.
Because that was one of the things that really pissed me off about BC.
The NDP never enacted it.
They didn't enact it. They passed it.
They put it in place,
yes,
but they never used it.
Nor has the UCP.
That's true. So what's the point?
It's there to be used, right? So
okay, but it's an empty threat.
No,
it's an empty threat. Unless you're actually going to do it, it's an empty threat. And both parties have shown they're not going to do that. And to be honest, I can sort of see why. It is pretty drastic stuff. But I think on that point, the whole pipeline issue is a bit of, and I think that's why it hasn't been really a factor in this campaign. Is that neither party can really do anything about it. They each have their own approach, whereas the NDP tried the social license approach, saying that if we demonstrate to the federal government and the rest of Canada that we're going to play along with them in all of their other policies, they'll let us have this. That showed not to be true. The Kenney Conservatives said, we're going to go to war, we're going to take a very combative approach with the federal government, but we're not actually, like, we won't do anything beyond rhetoric. We'll just talk really angrily. And we'll try and win a PR blitz, like with the whole war room and all that stuff. Well, that didn't work either. So I think neither party is really willing to make a lot of promises in terms of increasing access of Alberta's industries to market, because I think they both know that unless we're prepared to actually take steps in the separatist direction, there's very little we can do.
No, I agree. I think at the time, you asked, what's the point? I think the whole point of putting forward that bill, whatever it was called.
Or it wasn't, I don't think it was a bill. I think it was an executive measure. Because it was about export permits.
So the whole reason for doing
just denying permits to use the pipeline.
Just putting it out there and saying, this is a tool that we could use, sent a message on its own. Sent a message to BC, sent a message to the feds, right? And that's where it ended, right? No one really wanted to do it, but it's saying,
I think we blinked. Alberta as a whole blinked.
And we have since then, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing
even
is,
then, I think BC kind of said, okay, you do it. You try it. You try it and you see what happens.
I can't remember what we got out of it. I remember BC squawking about it. But I was, as an Albertan, if it was a UCP government that enacted that, I would have been just as happy. Like, I'm probably the only left-leaning separatist in this province, right? But I have some serious issues with our relationship with the federal government.
Yeah.
And we've been down that road before. We've talked about, okay, let's all build a port on Hudson's Bay and have the three prairie provinces work together.
Yeah.
But I think one of the reasons...
Can I address your last point?
Okay.
What I want to clarify when we talk about media is, yes, there absolutely is right-wing media in the legacy space. It's about disproportional impact. 80% of the traffic is skewed towards the progressive bent. They control the megaphones. In addition to that, there is the domination in the information space within academia and big tech. Search engine manipulation effect is, like, you don't see progressive parties complaining that Facebook and Twitter and Instagram are censoring them. This is all one-way traffic coming out of that. So that's why, in my point, is that conservatives aren't so, I can't say this yet. It may be, we may be seeing the emergence of conservatives saying, we're not going to complain about that anymore. We're going to simply cede the legacy information space. We're not going to contest that anymore. It's a waste of our time. Mm-hmm. We're going to put all of our eggs in the basket of new media, using not allowing the media conglomerates of, say, CBC, CTV, Post Media, Chorus Network, not allowing them to be gatekeepers between us and the public. You talked about, if your message is so distasteful that people don't vote for it, mm-hmm. Our response is that we can't get our message to the people because those media gatekeepers have deliberately distorted it to make it distasteful. And that polls have shown that when we are able to scrub party affiliation away from it, that our bread and butter ideas such as law and order, safer communities, lower taxes, greater personal autonomy, smaller government, those poll really well amongst individual people without party affiliation attached. So we know that our message will resonate. Mm-hmm. It's just we can't get our message through the media without them deliberately distorting it to degrade it. So if we can use new media to bypass those gatekeepers, will that have an effect? And because of this individual campaign, how the Smith conservatives have made aggressive use of new media, this is the first, I think, test case we're going to see of that strategy. Something I mentioned to Steve offline was it may also inform how Bill C-11, now that it's passed, is implemented. If let's say we get a resounding conservative victory. Mm-hmm. Let's say we do. Let's say upwards of 60 seats. Mm-hmm. Then I think we're going to see very concrete and rapid moves by the CRTC to control the new media space because they don't want that happening on the federal level. They do not want to see Poilievre adopting those same methods. That would be a disaster for the federal Liberals. So I think that is one thing that the rest of the country will absolutely be looking at this election in terms of strategy and techniques for following campaigns.
Yeah, I want to, just one thing.
What?
Regarding the use
of... Who the hell are you again?
Who is this guy?
Just the guy who records the thing. And
runs this thing. The guy in charge.
The technician is talking.
The technician, yeah. That's basically it. But, so because I guess I'll say I probably adopted the cynical, lazy attitude regarding this election. I don't, I'm generally a conservative person, but I don't like Danielle Smith. I don't trust her because of
the floor crossing.
Because of the floor crossing. If she would have held out one more election, she would have had it. But
she might have. They came real close.
That is my view anyway. That she would have had it. So I don't trust her because of the floor crossing. I don't like Rachel Notley either. And so I've been cynical and intellectually lazy, and I've just been trying to avoid at all costs election coverage.
Right.
The Conservatives have not been able to penetrate that. The NDP have. On new media, right? Like I don't watch legacy media at all. I don't like.
Yeah, same here. I see no value in it.
I have like two shows I watch on cable, and that's it. I don't watch cable. I don't watch news on broadcast television. I get news either by reading or
yeah.
So I've been avoiding political coverage on YouTube specifically, and it doesn't really come with my Spotify feed. But anyway, I pay for Spotify Premium because I needed to download, and I didn't want commercials. Well, I still get freaking commercials, and every single one of them is NDP.
Yeah.
Yes. In the last 2 weeks, every commercial on my Spotify podcast feed has been an NDP ad. There's been no ads for anything else.
Yeah.
Oh, they're reading some sort of activity on your part.
Well, also,
subconsciously, Steve.
They know that
because I listen to Blocked and Reported or Honestly with Barry Weiss or something like that.
Yeah, they know that you're interested in political items.
Yeah.
So their advertising partner, which is political based, is going to hit you.
And then also in on YouTube where I using a YouTube app as opposed to an ad blocker. Also, I'm getting back-to-back NDP ads, along with the other junk science ads that you always see on YouTube. But
okay, but now if I could give you a counter to that.
But I haven't seen any conservative stuff. Like the conservatives have not penetrated that market space, so I don't like. I'm interested in politics. I listen to a lot of right wing. I listen to more right wing podcasts than I do left wing podcasts. So how come I'm not getting a conservative ad?
It might be
because
I don't think your libertarianism overlaps. Or conflicts with your traditional.
I listen to basically 2 openly libertarian podcasts. That is the Fifth Column and then the Reason Roundtable. Well, 3 if you count the Reason Interview on. I listen to more conservative podcasts. I listen to leftist podcasts.
Yeah.
Right. I listen to like a couple National Review podcasts. I listen to Dispatch podcasts. I listen to Commentary podcast every day because they put it out every day.
Yep.
Right. All very conservative outlets. Blocked and Reported comes out like once every 2 weeks. And honestly, with Barry Weiss, that comes out like once a week. I listened to one New York Times podcast that was in an old podcast that they used to do called The Argument, and they came a new one called The Opinion that just came out. But I didn't really like it.
But your algorithms are not neutral.
No.
They are going to weigh heavily to whoever is paying for advertising.
Sure.
And the NDP has spent gigabucks.
That's my assertion is that the NDP has penetrated that space much better than the Conservative Party.
Let me give you a counter argument. You still knew that there is the UCP has asked Alberta Elections to conduct an investigation into NDP campaign funding, saying that the labor unions have funneled illegal money into the NDP to pay for those ads.
I noticed that changed throughout the campaign.
But you knew that.
Yeah.
Even though
I think I knew it because you shared it with me.
But you knew about it beforehand. Because I remember you said that. I shared it with you and you said, yeah, you'd heard about that. So even though it's not overt, you're still getting traffic into you.
Yeah, but so here, if I recall, my response to that was, you know what?
Was whataboutism.
Yes, integrity and accountability should be the norm.
Should be.
Right? And so the problem I have with what I lament about the refutation of mainstream media and the whole fake news concept. First of all, fake news is such a narcissistic gaslighting concept. It pisses me off. Right? It's so obvious.
And you can thank Hillary Clinton for it.
Yep.
Okay, let's save that for another episode. Right? I'm
sure she regrets unleashing that one on the world. But
she created it, but I gotta say that Trump really took it. Yeah. Really took
it. It was a gift. It was.
It was.
But I've seen this for a few years now. I can't remember when I first started noticing this, right? But the whole point of politics these days, left and right, is there is no accountability. It's all about perception and making sure nothing sticks to us, right?
A lot of it.
So when I hear you say, okay, unions, illegal funding and funneling and stuff like that, right? I'm just like, great, right? It would be nice if someone, and everyone's going after Trudeau as they should for a whole bunch of issues.
Yep.
Right? But I see everyone on the right doing the same thing, just sidestepping accountability for anything. What? It's like let's make sure nothing sticks.
Yeah, but that's not really the point. The point is that anytime there were ethics allegations against Smith and Kenney, immediately Elections Alberta launched into it. And for example, there were people who pointed out it was not a coincidence that Elections Alberta or the Ethics Commissioner released their report right before the debate. A lot of people say, no, that's not coincidence. Yet when the UCP says, hey, Elections Alberta, we need you to look into this, all of a sudden now there's foot dragging. And the concern on the conservative side of the fence is that the regulatory agencies are not being unbiased. That they were deliberately favoring the party that is going to probably line their pockets more. If
you know what? Again, and this just speaks to my point, frankly, as far as I'm concerned. If I bring up accountability on the right, It's like what George Shultz said about terrorism back in the day. There's no such thing, there's no such thing as one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
How?
Right?
How? Hang on.
I don't see how it applies. Well, let me finish my fucking thought for a second.
Well, okay.
All right. George Shultz said this. One man's terrorist.
Okay.
He refuted that whole concept. And then he went on to say in the next sentence, except the Contras, they're freedom fighters. Right? So, again,
you're totally misrepresenting.
What I'm
You're totally misrepresenting.
Hear what I'm hearing you say, because this is my concern.
Okay,
I'm saying, listen, you want to hold the left accountable? Great.
Okay, yeah.
Then hold your fucking selves accountable. And what I hear your response is,
how have we not?
Your response is, well, you know what, people, there's nothing to hold accountable. In fact, the people who are trying to hold them accountable are actually suspect.
No,
right?
You're totally misrepresenting me.
No,
totally and completely.
I'm not deliberately misrepresenting. I'm telling you what I hear.
No, I'm saying you're totally misrepresenting me. I don't know if it's deliberate or not, but you're totally misrepresenting.
This is what I heard.
When there are ethics allegations,
Yeah.
they were immediately investigated against both Kennedy and Smith, and rightly so. That is not in dispute. The Ethics Commissioner and Elections Alberta are looking into any matters that come before them, as so they should. My concern is that they only want to look into one side of the spectrum. That when it's an allegation against a conservative leader, they're on it, and so they should. But when it's an allegation against the NDP, it's like, well, let's wait till after the election.
You know what?
That's my problem.
I am going to look into this specific issue because I'm very curious. I find it hard to believe that Elections Alberta would be farther left than they would be farther right. If anything, I would expect them to bias to the right.
They're part of the public sector.
Yeah, I know the evil public sector.
Yeah. Maybe not evil, but certainly self-interested. Certainly self-interested. And they know who's going to butter their bread.
Yeah, the people with all the money, the right.
No.
The capitalists.
Oh my God.
I didn't see one of the things you sent a story out. It was probably actually about this, and I learned something from that story which was that the public sector unions automatically, because of the NDP constitution, if members of certain public sector unions or leadership of certain public sector unions automatically have leadership positions within the NDP party.
Yes.
Just because they.
It's part of the party constitution.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. NDP party is redundant.
You're right.
This is true.
Welcome. Hello. My name is Steve. I'm from the Department of Redundancy Department.
Yes, it's true. As part of the new Democrats' constitution, organized labor has, specifically within the AFL and the public sector unions, have seats or have representation on the board. That's not necessarily like the elected representatives, but in, say, policy conventions.
Yeah. So I definitely have a problem with that, especially not so much with private labor unions, but certainly with public sector unions having leadership automatically having positions within leadership in one party.
I mean, I don't have a problem with it. I think they are certainly allowed to pursue their own self-interest. I just think it would be better if that was more widely known in the
Sure, but I have a problem with, look, as individuals, join what party you want, run for office in what party you want, do whatever.
Oh, my Lord.
But it's like when you we are the provincial employees unions.
Yep.
And we have fealty, I guess, to this one party, right?
Yes.
That ain't good, right?
What
public sector employees need, I feel like something with law. I mean, in the perfect world, public sector employees, normally I don't get Trent this riled up.
Wait.
Well,
Just wait.
Normally you're not saying anything, so I mean, that's...
But yeah, I have a real problem with them... individual. Jeez, I have a hard time articulating this. Like I said, as individuals, join what party you want, support what party you want, whatever.
Thank you.
But as in creating your institution,
Yeah.
your representative institution, and then that institution, because civil servants are supposed to at least maintain an air of
Impartiality.
right? Yeah, the civil service is supposed to be impartial and serve whichever government gets elected, whether they like it or not.
Right.
This throws that right out the window. It's
Kind of does. It creates conflict of interest.
so it's good in like you said, if everybody knew, that would be better. At least the light of day. If everybody knew that. If I repeat myself.
So in kind of a bit of undercover work, I used to cultivate a lot of friendships within the provincial NDP, which now that they found out in the last about 3 years that I was actually a conservative, and I am now canceled. I know persona non grata. They won't talk to me. But I knew from them that the labor unions will actively recruit political candidates for the NDP within their locals.
right.
The big four: AUPE, the Health Sciences Union, basically the support hospital support workers.
Yeah.
Teachers Union, Nurses Union,
Right.
in the big four. They will recruit people to run as candidates for the NDP. Now, it's not the NDP doing this. It's the unions that do this,
Right.
saying that, we're going to recruit you. You should run for the NDP. They will hold seminars where they will train not just candidates, but they'll train people on how to be campaign managers. They will train people on how to be write press releases, to do all of the background work in a campaign office. So they don't just recruit and train candidates.
The recruiting and training infrastructure.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this is all paid. Hold on, let me finish.
He's gonna blow. Like he's turning red here.
They are actively recruiting the entire campaign infrastructure for the NDP.
Yeah.
And you can make a very strong argument that the NDP is the political wing of those four unions.
Right.
In the same way that Sinn Féin is the political wing of the IRA.
Oh my God. You didn't just go there.
I did.
Oh.
Sir, the floor is yours. No, hang on. While
I'm
you're gathering
sorry,
your thoughts,
I-
let me close with this one statement.
He's got to poke you one more time.
Because
don't
it
have-
can't get
hold
any
on.
worse than that.
I don't have a problem with this. I don't have a problem with this. These public sector folks should be allowed to advocate for their own self-interest. No matter how nakedly and rapaciously they do it, they should still be allowed to do that. There's absolutely nothing wrong, in my view, with what they are doing. It's just that I think everyone should know about it.
Yeah.
Then, put it above board, and it's all good.
Okay.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Oh my God. Sinn Féin? IRA?
Yeah.
You went there. Oh,
Well, no, I'm not saying that the NDP is a terrorist organization.
Or that the unions
saying-
are terrorist organizations.
Yeah.
Or that one is a
that they
military
are-
wing and one is a political wing.
Yeah, that one is, say, the business wing, the money-making wing, and they have a political wing. In the same way that it's just we usually use those terms like the IRA is a political organization in itself, right?
Yeah, but it follows
Right.
a Clausewitzian model, which
Yeah.
is, okay, politics by force.
Or you could say that the UFA was the political wing of an agricultural lobby.
Sure.
Right? So fair enough. It's just that most people don't really know what UFA is or was. To them, it's a retail outlet.
To me, it's something on the side of grain silos throughout the
Yeah.
province.
Yeah, it's a retail outlet.
Yeah.
Which actually, interesting piece of trivia, it actually is the old political party. It transformed itself in the 1930s into a retail outlet.
Into wholesale distribution retail.
Yes, exactly. It is the same organization. But
Wow.
people readily understand that, every observer readily understands that the Sinn Féin is a political wing of a different organization.
Yeah.
And that's my key point in the analogy. Not that the NDP is going to start blowing up Protestant pubs in
The
Council Town.
unions are going to start blowing up.
Yeah, the unions will start blowing up Protestant pubs.
But only Protestant ones.
Yeah, or whatever.
Well,
It's
maybe
going to be
Catholics. They are unionists.
there you go. So it'll be,
very clever.
the
very
oil
clever.
companies will start blowing up the Catholic pubs. So
Okay, so my response to both of you was just kind of generically. I mean, why is this an issue? I'm glad that you said, Patty, that you don't have a problem with this.
No.
Because to me there
they should be
is
allowed to advocate for their
there
own
is an
self-interest,
interest, right?
Yeah.
Because and I get that there is at a certain level a conflict of interest that in their performance on the professional
right
level,
on the
right?
as the executive branch.
Right? Because yes, they need to be neutral as bureaucrats to whichever government is
Yeah.
in power.
Yep.
Right?
They should. They should.
But I mean, this is the whole. I mean, the whole reason for them banding together as bureaucrats into a union is for collective bargaining purposes, and that's the
self-interest.
party and the party of that. Well, yeah, they see their self-interest in that, and the party of that, of that conceptually, is the New Democrats.
I want to.
right?
I want to say that I will admit that this is a place. I guess of hypocrisy, of my own personal hypocrisy. It's a place of my failing as a doctrinaire libertarian. Because the libertarian view is that corporations, institutions, are just made up of people. Are just groups of people acting with a common purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So therefore, they should have the same rights as any person because they're just people, right? Mm-hmm. In my heart of hearts, I don't have a problem within a democracy, like limiting the rights of government workers because nobody held a gun to their head and made them take a government job.
What do you mean limiting the rights? I'm very concerned when anyone starts talking about limiting rights.
Well, you're right. You're right to be. This is why I should never be in charge of anything.
Other than this podcast. Okay,
I'm not really in charge of this podcast.
Go on. Like,
Steve's in charge of the
flesh out
podcast, folks. We're good with that.
Flesh out the thought.
The thought is that I think within a representative democracy, it is not correct or not fair. Maybe it's just my warped sense of fairness for the public sector to advocate in its own interests because its
Because
interest
it can be done at the expense of the broader public?
yes, and its interests are supposed to be the interests of the broader public. It's not supposed to have a separate interest from the broader public,
But it does.
but it does.
Well, of course it does, because they're individuals, and again,
And
but
they're human beings.
But this is the important thing, right? As I said, they need to be able to distinguish between their own self-interest as people who are earning a wage or a salary in return for labor, right? That's the one thing. That's collective bargaining, and the nature of the labor they are performing in return for a wage or salary, right? Which is as bureaucrats that are supposed to be impartial.
You guys are asking a lot.
I
Like,
get
you
it.
are
Oh,
really...
so-
No, it's a utopian vision. I'm not gonna deny that.
But this is this is one of at least my one, if not two, counterpoints.
I want to reiterate, like this
Yeah.
is my personal hypocrisy, and
Yeah.
and that I shouldn't be put in charge of anything because of this. it should be disqualifying me from like stuff. So I'm not saying it's a good thing. It's just it's a thing that really grates on me.
Well, as an aside, I think one of the themes of all the conversations we have, and this is why I particularly enjoy being able to have these conversations with you two.
Right.
Well,
maybe Steve.
Is
Because I never talk.
well, no, because it's that idealism leads to paradox, right? It's how you navigate those paradoxes, right? So you just hit on one of them, So I mean, you and I, Steve, we agree on a lot of things. You and I, Pat, we agree on a lot of things.
do.
It's just like
boys.
how we navigate these things. But
Okay.
this is one of the things I've been wanting to push back with is like, really? Okay, great. How many political boards of, on the right-hand side of the aisle of the UPC are filled up with business interests, are filled up with, businessmen?
Plenty.
Plenty. It's like,
but it's,
really?
again,
Like,
it's a
how is there-
disproportionate impact, right? Because, like, now you mentioned that, they want to, like, their primary goal is collective bargaining.
Yeah.
I'd say no, that's only part of it. That's not their primary goal. The primary goal is control of the political process. In that, for example, look how the ATA, or the teachers union, seeks to control curriculum for the use of indoctrination. You may, hey dude, just because you may not agree with it, but on my side of the fence, we see it as a very real and pressing thing. Or how we think Elections Alberta is deliberately dragging their feet in investigating the potential of illegal campaign funding. We're not, again, like the point is, we're not disdaining their investigation of our side of the fence. In fact, it's good because it forces us to be squeaky clean. If we know that we are going to get leapt on the second somebody goes outside the painted lines, then that's good because it keeps us honest.
I do not believe for a minute that the right is squeaky
sides.
clean. And
well, that's
it never
fine.
has been.
That's fine. That's good. And if we get investigated every single time, that's good.
It's not about,
drag the wrongdoers into the sunlight.
It's not about what you get caught at. It's what you're getting away with in the meantime.
No, irrelevant. If we're doing something wrong, we should be prosecuted. 100%, full stop, end of statement. If we are breaking the rules, if we are breaking the spirit of the rules, we should be held accountable.
You heard it, folks. Okay,
But
Patty
so
and I
should
agree
the
on
left.
something.
But
Yeah.
so
and I'm
should
saying the exact
the
same.
left.
I'm saying the exact same thing to you
And
from the other
the
direction.
public sector unions do not seem to share that convention.
If I
To them, it seems that they are willing to look the other way in defense of their self-interests.
Okay, but in response to that, okay, so for you, the broad umbrella of public sector unions, that's your boogeyman. For me, I've got the same boogeyman with a different name, and that's
Sure.
capitalists.
Well, the big difference, though, is capture and regulatory capture. You can choose what companies you do business with. A big capitalist, big evil
No, I
capitalist,
can't.
you'd say, yeah, sure you can.
No,
I'm
I
not
can't.
going to buy from that guy if I don't want to.
Fuck no! The CRTC just let who was it? Rogers buy out Shaw.
Okay.
I don't get a choice in that.
Yeah, and
So now I've got Bell,
I'm sorry,
I've
who
got
did this?
Shaw.
I'm sorry, who did this?
Government regulation.
Oh, I thought capitalism was the problem.
Oh yeah. Do you hear Rogers complaining?
No, of course not.
No,
But
because do you hear the
government regulator that caused this problem? But even then, you don't have to get a cell phone with those guys.
Oh come on!
You can get a cell phone with another provider.
Okay, let's take that a step further.
Can I choose what school board I work with? No. I have to deal with the teacher in the ATA. I have no choice. I have no choice.
No, I don't know. It seems to me there's plenty of religious and private schools.
It's still run by the ATA. And if we said, we are going to fund say private schools, which don't have to have ATA teachers. If we were going to fund those 100% of the way we fund people in the public and the Catholic boards, that would be fair. But who fights that every step of the way and prevents and as soon as the Conservatives try and increase funding in private schools, who fights with every tooth and nail and brings their massive financial resources to the board? The teachers union. You think the NDP is gonna protect private school funding? Or school choice? Or charter schools? Hell no.
or something as radical as backpack funding.
Yeah, see? Or allow kids to leave catchment areas. I mean, this is part of the issue. It's not, these unions aren't just about collective bargaining and increasing the bottom line for their members. It's as the welfare state has grown and the scope of government has grown over the last 40 years, the public sector is now something like over 30% of our GDP. It controls the commanding heights of the economy. So who controls the public sector controls the state.
It's an interesting use of a percentage of GDP. That's implying that they're creating wealth, which I question.
No, it's consumption.
Consumption of
GDP.
30% of our GDP.
Yeah, is wrapped up in government. Government creates no wealth.
I mean, it's people with jobs, right?
It's people with jobs, but they don't create wealth. No. If
You know, all those salaries come from wealth created by
confiscated from other people.
Oh, here
There
we
are
go.
only
But
three.
it's true.
It's true. It's true.
It's an undeniable fact.
Yeah. This
The
is
government
not.
has no money without taxpayers.
Yeah, this is not a matter of debate, right? There are only three things that create wealth: agriculture, manufacturing, resources. That's it. That is it. There's nothing else that creates wealth. You could maybe argue that the tech sector is evolving into something that might be able to create wealth. But as it stands right now, the products of tech are simply used to facilitate the activities in agriculture, manufacturing, and resources.
Or it's a manufacturing sector of itself. Or you can argue that service creates wealth. That's another thing.
Except, well, no, service is in the service of those three branches. That, say you have a company, a business services company, or say accounting. What are you servicing? What money are you counting without those three? You know what I mean? Service industries cannot exist without the big three. Everything comes down to the big three.
No,
Everything else consumes the wealth created by the big three. So, anyway, that's...
Like, look at... I think to better articulate your point, look at truck... Instead of accounting, look at trucking.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Transportation.
Transportation doesn't do anything without those three.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
there's nothing to transport.
Yeah, there's nothing to transport. Yeah, exactly. So anyway,
Right?
let's...
And as we always say, or
Can
truckers
we-
like always
Yep.
to say, truckers always truck everything. Everything comes on a truck.
So as for the campaign itself,
I think
noticed
someone
that-
needs... Do you need a comfort
Oh,
break?
you need a break?
All right, we'll pause.
All right.
Come back in a second. And we're back.
Okay.
But before anybody starts, I want to push back on something Trent said.
Okay.
His boogeyman that he was talking about, the
Capitalist.
capitalist lobbyists, evil capitalist lobbyists. And the reason I push back is in my, I guess, more of a pushback is just my expressing my own view of the situation. Is that since we live in a capitalist society, kind of, more regulation than the
By and large, yeah, externality capitalism, I guess you could call it.
My view, the role of the government is pretty much just to provide infrastructure to support individuals and corporations to pursue their interests, right? So from my point of view, a business lobbying government is much more proper than a government employee lobbying government to me. Because the purpose of the government employee, in my view, is to just serve to provide that infrastructure.
Provide law and order or rule of law.
Yeah.
Enforcement of contracts and
conquer things like roads and
keep the garbage off the streets.
and keep the garbage off the streets and the power and all that stuff, right? That's the proper role of government to provide that foundation for everybody else not in government to pursue their interests and grow the economy
or just get the hell out of the way
and grow wealth.
Yeah.
Right.
But
so
that's not our current view of government and what government should do.
Yeah.
We now live in an age where we see government as a solver of social problems.
Yeah. But I'm kind of that's why I kind of have a view of or sympathetic to the viewpoint of it's proper. When a civil servant sticks his head out of his hole, you're supposed to punch him back down and say, "Get back to work."
Get back.
And shut up and get back to work, right? And to me, emotionally to me, that seems appropriate. But even if it isn't legally or morally appropriate, but
I would say that the average member of one of those four unions would probably disagree.
It is probable that we get an argument.
I
for sure,
don't want to go out on a limb here, but I think they might have a different view.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
Yeah,
I agree with you, but like I said,
my thing is like when you punch the civil servant down, you say you don't like it. There's lots of jobs in the private sector you can go get, and then I can't do this to you anymore.
Right.
Right. Nobody held a gun to your head. I mean, you wanted the pension, you wanted the job security. That's fine. The cost is shut the fuck up and do your job.
well, I disagree with that.
Now, it's not the way the system works, and it's probably, like I say,
Yeah,
it's probably a
you're
moral
saying-
failing on my part.
You're talking about an ideal, not the
Well,
reality.
it wouldn't be an ideal for government workers, but
No, it sure wouldn't.
Well, I see individual public sector workers having no fewer rights to a pension and job security and a decent wage than anyone outside of that. But like I said,
I'm not saying they should be underpaid, right? Or anything like that, or that,
Although that was the prevailing view in the 1950s.
that they were underpaid?
Yes.
Perhaps.
And they were deliberately, the public sector traditionally made, even probably pre-1970, although it began to change in the 1960s. The view prior to that was that the public sector was deliberately paid somewhat less than the private because they had the guaranteed job, they had the
pension plan.
or that was even before pension plans.
Right.
Pension plans really weren't a reality until after 65 in the Quiet Revolution. But like they had that guaranteed job.
Right.
Whereas the private sector was you did not have a guarantee of employment.
The private sector is what it always has been.
Right. So then the public sector was paid somewhat less in return for better working conditions, like say better benefits, better holidays, and the guarantee of employment.
Right.
But of course that changed, after, Quiet Revolution and so on and so forth. So anyway.
I think when it comes to me and the public sector, it's, as I just said, I don't have a problem with them as individuals trying to get the best collective bargaining for themselves. To me, that's within or without the public sector, that's acceptable.
Yeah.
They do have a conflict of interest to a certain extent. When you talk about getting them to keep their heads down and shut the fuck up or whatever, my two issues with the public sector, and this also ties into big government, right? Generally, I see inefficiencies, and we've seen that at the military level as well when it comes to budgeting for units, right? Yeah. Same kind of concept all around, right? I see there's a lot of scope for improved efficiencies within any bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. The other concept is, and we've discussed this before as well, is the quote-unquote public service concept, right? I find it's actually all the bureaucratic procedures are put in place to deny service.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And
it's rationing. It's a method of rationing. Yeah.
And so I have a serious problem with that because basically they're trying to weed out the people who quote unquote aren't deserving, right? And to me, this falls under the libertarian concepts that you guys keep bringing up. It's like, listen, you can't assume by default. Your default position cannot be that no one deserves this, that everyone's trying to work the system, right? It should be the other way around, right? Everyone who deserves whatever service it is you're put in place to provide should be getting that service. And your job is to provide it and then weed out the people who are working the system.
But
right?
Isn't that kind of what you just said those bureaucratic filters are put in place for?
That's right. And I'm saying that's wrong. That's not how it should be. Right, and I've experienced it, and I think I've described it.
How else do you do it? How else would you need a way of?
Can I use the example? I don't know if I've said this right. When my wife and I, she got pregnant for the first time.
Right,
she had a miscarriage.
Yeah,
we ended up in hospital. And she stayed an extra night.
Yeah.
I went to check on her, and the nurses said, she's kind of weak. Let's keep her an extra night.
Yeah.
She was a British citizen.
Yes.
Have I told you this before?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So, long story short, we owed $2,000 to the Alberta government.
Yeah.
For that stay. And
the NHS didn't cover that? Like, cover her?
No. She was in Alberta. Right? So, we went in, and we're saying, we don't have $2,000. Right? And the bureaucrat behind the desk said...
Too bad.
Said, yeah, that's what you owe us.
Yep.
Right? Until Trent said, aha, I know what angle I can play here. I'm the father of that child.
Yep.
I'm a Canadian citizen. I'm a citizen of Alberta.
Should be covered under me.
Right? And she immediately, as soon as I uttered those words, she pulled out the paperwork from under her desk, put it out, sign here, fill this out, yada, done. $200. Right? But it was only when I said those words. She knew that was a possibility.
Right. But she didn't ask.
She didn't ask. I obviously did not have a British accent.
Right.
Right? So she could have provided that service, but did not. And that's the example I will always use. Right? I have a serious problem with that. Because it's like, okay, do not try and pretend you are a public service. You are a denier of service unless.
What incentive did she have to investigate? Like, again, she knew you had no British accent, that there was at least the possibility you were an Alberta citizen. What incentive did she have to pursue that?
None. Obviously, because the bureaucratic procedures are set up to limit the money they give out. So it's not about it's not about providing the service. It's about minimizing the provision of that service.
She was paid the same, one way or the other. In fact, it was easier for her to just pay up.
Well, it's not just that. It's obviously that the department.
It's also in the government's interest for you to pay the $2,000 instead of $2,000.
Yeah,
or $200.
And it's the nature of the bureaucracy. And it's just the nature of bureaucracy. Whether it's government, whether it's a massive mega corporation like Google or Imperial Oil, it's bureaucracy, man. The bureaucrat will always seek to minimize their own effort unless they have a direct incentive not to do so. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, I guess. But the fact that she didn't argue with it after that point, it's like, he's like, well, I guess I have to fill this out now. Because my sense wasn't that she was unwilling to do that. It was like the rule was in place that unless someone provides
you have to say the code phrase.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I'm not advocating for her. I'm not saying that. I'm not trying to defend her position at all. I'm just saying that this is what we should expect.
Yeah.
This is the way it is.
And likewise, when it comes to conversations about, big government and stuff like that, I don't have, to a certain extent, I have an issue with where government is stepping in more and more these days. But I see it more as an extension of, we get out of our society what we expect of it, right? Like the whole, all the conversations we have about not being able to do a right-hand fucking turn on a red fucking light anymore, right? And I see government having extended itself to that extent these days. That's where I feel it's kind of goofy. Like, it is not providing any sort of reasonable, rational service to the people.
Well,
right?
I would say that the rise of big government comes out of the philosophical convention that it doesn't matter whether or not government is the most efficient agent. Or, first of all, it comes from the philosophical convention that government is not, the role of government, contrary to Steve's assertion, the role of government is not to simply keep the lights on, keep the water running, and provide rule of law. The role of government is to solve problems. Okay? So now that we've done that, we're taking the stance that government it doesn't matter whether or not government is the most efficient agent in solving these problems, because even some of the most strident advocates of big government will admit that it's not. That's beside the point. The point is that government is the only morally acceptable agent in solving problems. That government is disinterested. That government is neutral, as, say, compared to a private organization, which is, say, profit-driven, is not going to be neutral. It is going to be self-interested and biased, and government is immune to that. Now, of course, I disagree with that fundamentally. I say the bureaucracy is just as profit-oriented, just as self-interested, and so on and so forth. But, that's a debate, for another time. The extension of that, and kind of where we find ourselves, is that if government is going to, or we've evolved to a point where the advocates of big government believe that the individual is no longer capable or should not be trusted to make as many decisions as maybe was seen 50 years ago. And that, you shouldn't be allowed to make a right-hand turn on a red light because you'll fuck it up.
Well, that's the sentiment these days, obviously.
You shouldn't be allowed to make decisions for yourself because you are not qualified to make decisions for yourself. You cannot be relied upon to make decisions for yourself. Therefore, we need, and now I'm not going to go down any further rabbit holes on this, but the idea is that we need a technocratic class of experts to guide us and make these decisions for us. I'm not saying I advocate with that. I passionately fight this point of view, but that's what the opposite view is, and that's why who controls the public sector in this environment is so very important.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with you in that respect. People should be allowed to make their own decisions in so many ways, but using the traffic analogy and a whole bunch of others. I just get the sense, and maybe this is just me getting older, right? But my co-citizens are just completely incapable of making informed decisions for themselves anymore, right? And this is why we butt heads a lot about things like the Freedom Convoy.
Yes.
Right? I again, using the Facebook example, I get a lot of people, friends from the right, who just they like to post memes about the woke left whining and screaming and throwing tantrums, right? I look at everything that came out from the right regarding COVID and things like the Freedom Convoy, and I just see the same thing. It's just a bunch of people whining from the right. I see it from both sides. I have a problem with the woke left screaming and freaking and throwing tantrums about this, that, and the other thing. I have the same thing from the right.
Or say how Alberta NDP candidate Samir Kayandi said that the trucker convoy was just a bunch of Nazis. How he said this on Twitter. How that they were a hateful, foreign-funded, white supremacist blockade threatening Ottawa. And how they have swastikas and Confederate flags, symbols that stand for my erasure and my children's death.
Well, those symbols do stand for those things.
Yeah, and they were.
And if there were elements of the convoy that had that, now it is wrong.
I'm pretty
to
sure
portray,
the Confederate flag never stood for. He's Indian, East Indian.
Yeah,
but again, never stood for an Indian fellow.
This is the whole thing about you talk to guys who against the convoy, and they're fixated on, number one, how the guy had the Confederate flag and the other guy had the Nazi flag because they were saying these were the tools.
No, nobody had a Nazi flag. He had a Canadian flag that he'd put swastikas on.
Yeah, because he was.
But yeah, the insinuation was that the government was acting like Nazis.
Yeah, in that regard. But okay, I'm descending into moral equivalency, but I'm kind of saying that these are. I think they're specious, right? To say that the Freedom Convoys were all a bunch of Nazis.
I think I agree. That's an inaccurate statement.
It's specious, and it's
what I said was the Freedom Convoy are a bunch of whiners. That's my issue, right?
Okay.
And in the same way, the right keeps pointing at the woke left as a bunch of whiners, right? I see the same thing, right? It was an emotional thing at a difficult time. The three of us have had the conversation. Okay, were the measures out of hand? In retrospect, looks like they may well have been, right? Discussion for another time. Yeah. But something had to be done, right? Yeah. So the response to it shouldn't be, let's all fucking freak out and scream about me.
I can see why. Yeah, if in an extreme, looking through an extreme prism, I can see why you would call convoy members whiners. Yeah, because they were complaining about the established structure. So yeah, I could see why if I supported that structure, then yeah, I could see why I would see them as whiners. Yeah,
I'm not talking about the structure in terms of government, like the Alberta government. The federal government.
I mean the public health policies at the time.
Right. So at the time, it's okay. We got to do something, right? So I found, you know what I don't miss. Actually, I've been going for doctor's appointment every couple of weeks now, starting about a month ago, and I walk into the clinic, and for the first time in over a year, at least, I have to put on a mask, and it's
only when you go into a medical facility.
Yeah. And it's weird.
You doing chemo or syphilis treatments?
Neither.
It is kind of weird, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's, I don't miss it.
Yeah.
No.
Right? I don't miss it at all.
They
So-
made me put a mask on when I went to get blood work a
Yeah.
month or so ago. Or I guess it was 6 weeks
Yeah.
ago now. But
And
And you almost want to look at them and say, you know, will you guys come out of the dark ages? Like, please?
no, I think they saw it as an opportunity. Probably like the blood draw clinics and stuff have probably wanted to mask people for a long time before the
well,
pandemic.
and again, there have been societies all over the world. Like, I remember back in the 80s or 90s, you'd see movies about, or documentaries about people in China or parts of Korea where people wear masks all the time, right? So it's just a health.
It's
So
superstition.
I think,
It's superstition. The Cochrane Library just released their report on the public health response in the United States on COVID. The lead author is the head of Harvard Epidemiology. Like, this is not a crank organization. And they said there is zero definitive effort or evidence, zero, that masking makes any effect whatsoever. It's superstition.
for COVID.
for COVID.
Any respiratory infection.
Really?
Okay, so it doesn't have to be respiratory. Like, again, and I don't even want to go down that road, right? I'm just saying.
I'm saying that the health establishment is so, how would you say, so doggedly refusing to admit they were wrong. That where they control, their sphere of control, health facilities, they are still making people mask. Yeah. It's emperor's new clothes.
You know what? Again, and then I just don't have a problem with it.
Well,
it's kind of weird. So you asked the question, why am I doing this? And you're joking. I get that, right? So I'm actually going in for psychological counseling in a couple of weeks, right?
probably because of us.
No,
Probably
it's-
because of me hectoring you and badgering you.
Actually, you guys are the sanest thing I've had in the last 10 years.
Then you need help, my friend.
Exactly.
You need help.
I do need help.
It's
Right?
a good thing you're getting it.
So the weird thing is, and this is the only problem I have with wearing a mask. I'm sitting here talking to my psychological counselor across
That's
across
gotta
the
be really
desk,
annoying doing talk therapy.
Yeah,
Right?
that would be.
because the whole thing is,
I'd be like, can we move this conversation outside or something?
Yeah, because
You
you
know?
need to be able to see that person's face.
absolutely, right? So I miss that. I absolutely miss that.
I would be looking for a new practitioner, brother.
No,
I mean-
no, because this clinic, I love this clinic. I've been with them over 20 years. I
They're
love my
holding
doctor.
that line that you have to come in and be masked to get psychological counseling.
My point is, and I get it. Now, in an ideal world, it wouldn't be this way. Can I live with it? Yes. Right, and that's kind of my whole approach to the whole concept. Right, you know what sucked? Wearing a mask, right?
Yeah.
But under the circumstances, it was an inconvenience. Right? I looked at the whole thing. My bottom line was, we got this weird ass fucking thing that our society globally hasn't dealt with in a century. What are we going to do about it? Was it blown out of proportion? Looking that way. Right? Was it heavy handed? Looking that way. But my bottom line at the time was, let's make sure this doesn't get out of hand. Right? Because we don't want to see what happened in 1919.
Steve, before I leap in and segue it back into the election,
Yes.
Yeah, I get nothing. Sorry.
I would say that the masks, once we became more familiar with them, we did understand, that they are harmful. They are a major impediment to communication because so much of what we do relies on the reading of facial expressions. We know now that it really put back early childhood development of kids. And we are only now coming to terms with, the educational problems that the mask mandates caused. And they were considerable emotional distress for people. It wasn't just an inconvenience. We thought it was.
For me, it
but
was.
societally, we are now coming to understand that, there was harm.
Yeah.
There was real harm.
Again, it's a balancing of interests.
Now-
Right? It's like, what are you supposed to do in an urgent situation like that? You don't have time to debate about it. If we've done nothing, and it's impossible to prove a negative.
But to tie it, rather than doing another episode on COVID,
Yeah.
which we should do,
Bring it back.
later.
Bring it back.
But back to the election.
Bring it back to the election.
Okay, you guys are now campaign managers. Okay, you're being paid big bucks to win an election. So let's look at this as nonpartisanly as we can and look purely on a structural kind of concept. How would you advocate that each party should, what points should they emphasize? What points should they avoid? And how good a job do you think each one did?
In order for them to win the election?
Yes, just win. Just win. That's it. Just win, baby.
Objectively, not from my point of view, not to make Trent happy.
No. Say how would you win? And in that regard, I am kind of surprised. Well, actually, no, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised, but I thought each party's record during COVID would play a bigger role in the election. And I'm kind of surprised how both parties have really tried to avoid it. Now, when I think about it for a little bit longer, I can kind of say, yeah, that makes sense, because nobody wins. Nobody wins on that
Well, yeah,
one.
it's a nothing burger, right?
Well-
the ND was not in power,
No.
so it's irrelevant.
Well, here's what I mean. The NDP were strong advocates for locking down everything. Now, on the one hand, I thought this could be a very useful UCP talking point to say, look, you put that party in power, you are one disaster away, you are one black swan event away from going back into East Germany, because you know what they wanted to do during COVID, which was lock everything down, close everything, and that was just incredibly destructive to the working class. You could make good hay with that. But on the other hand, there's a lot of people in the conservative base who are very upset with how the Kenny conservatives handled that.
Yeah.
So I could see that, that might hurt you as much as it helps. Like, it's a huge wild card, not really worth. And I'm talking not in terms of moral or ethical policy. I'm talking about, if I am paid to get a party to win the election, then in that case, I would say it was probably smarter for the Conservatives to not talk about it, because I think both parties do not want their policy platforms, their advocacy at the time, to be refreshed in the public mind.
Well, again, I think, from the Tory point of view in particular, you don't want Kenny's policies brought back up again.
Because you didn't make anybody happy.
Right.
You didn't make your base, the left was upset because you weren't locking down hard enough.
Yeah.
And the right was upset because to them, you were locking down too hard.
Exactly. So if the subject comes up, you're going to alienate both sets.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
On
a lot of the argument, or a lot of the pundits these days will say, when you're pissing off both sides, you're probably in the right space.
Right, probably. Yeah.
Right.
But again...
But for the electoral politics standpoint...
it's too risky.
Yeah.
Too risky. Like, on the one hand, I can absolutely see the NDP not wanting to talk about that.
Yeah.
They're, the hard base for each party, you got that vote down. The only thing you got to worry, the guy who's always voted New Democrat, the only thing you got to worry about, let's put ourselves in the position of New Democrats first off right now. Let's say we're their strategists, we're their campaign managers. Those guys are always going to vote for us. They're not going to vote against us. So what we have to do, as far as they are concerned, that's say 25, 30% of the electorate. We just got to make sure they get out. Okay, we got to get that vote out.
Yeah.
The swing vote, and again, there's no point in pandering, in trying to get that, there's no point in me trying to get you to vote NDP, because, you, Steve, because you're not gonna, okay? No matter what I say, no matter what I do, I would have to stop, my party would have to fundamentally stop being that party to get you to vote for it.
Yes.
So you're a waste of my time. Yeah. What I need to target is that swing voter.
Yeah.
That person who might vote NDP, who might vote UCP.
Yeah,
it depends.
And the swing voter in Alberta is an urban person who's just not married to the NDP.
Right.
Because the rural vote
is
basically all UCP.
Yeah, wasting my time.
Yeah.
I'm not going to bother campaigning outside Edmonton, Red Deer, Lethbridge, Grand Prairie. I'm not going to waste my time.
And Grand Prairie is probably
only city center.
Yeah.
Only the city center in Grand Prairie, Red Deer, and Lethbridge.
Yeah, because Lethbridge is a very agricultural city. Red Deer and Grand Prairie are both very, very resource industry-based cities, right? Like,
so I want to target the upper income
Yep.
service industry base. And that's what I mean by the center of those towns.
Yeah. The lawyers, the accountants.
Yeah, the upper income guys.
Yeah.
The higher your income, the more receptive you are to new Democrat policies.
Yeah.
Lethbridge I can target because it's a university and government town.
Right.
Right? So I have that public sector vote that I can tap into, right?
And academic.
Yeah, well, I'm counting the academic as public sector, right? Because, well,
That's
they're
where the
not
check
private
comes from.
schools.
Yeah. They are
The
government
check
schools.
comes from the government, right? So I count them as extended public sector. Now, for that swing vote, I do not really want to talk about a predilection for locking everything down, because that swing voter is probably middle class, soft blue collar, and they suffered during the lockdowns.
Yeah.
So that's not something I want to. I don't want anyone talking about that. So if the UCP don't bring it up, I'm certainly not going to go after their record in COVID, because I don't want that bouncing back on.
Yeah,
me.
you're right. I don't think that the NDs don't need to bring it up. And if the UCP brings it up, the NDs win. They win that conversation.
I don't know. They might.
I think
they might.
I think
It's-
overall,
it's a coin toss. It's a coin toss. But at any rate, I just don't see there's clear enough victory in there. Like I just don't see.
there's nothing to
Yeah.
be gained, right? Like
There's-
it's who loses least.
Yeah.
basically.
The big battles are really
Yeah.
in Edmonton and Calgary, though, right? Because
Yes.
the province is roughly 4.5 million, or
Yeah.
4 million people, maybe pushing 4.5
Yeah.
million people now, and 2 and a bit of those people are divided between
Yeah.
Edmonton and Calgary.
Really, that's
And
about
so
it.
that's where the swing voters are. Because
If the NDP only wins Edmonton and Calgary, they can still form a majority.
yeah,
Like, for example, in Lethbridge, there's only like 2 seats.
period.
How many are in Edmonton? How many in Calgary?
Oh.
I think the battles in Calgary is what it comes down to.
I
There's
would agree. The
about
real
20
battleground
odd
right,
seats.
in
There's
this
about
election
20
for
odd
sure is
seats.
probably Calgary, because Edmonton is the government
Yeah,
town.
like Grand Prairie is 1 seat. I thought they were 2. They're 1. Red Deer is 2 seats. Lethbridge is 3 seats. Calgary and Edmonton each. Metro area, yeah, probably around 20 each. Probably around 20 each. Well, for example, in
Well, how many? There's 87. We said.
87 seats. Yeah,
How does how does the ND pull off? They can't do it with just Calgary and Edmonton.
yeah, they could. They probably could.
You said 20 each. That's 40.
How reliable is Fairview for the NDP? Just as an example of rural riding, given that's where Rachel Nutley's from.
No, but I mean, you can't do it with Calgary and Edmonton alone. That's only
She's
40.
running in Strathcona, though. I don't think she's running in Fairview. She's running in Strathcona.
Yeah, no, I know.
Is
I
she?
just
No,
thought Fairview was. Fairview
I
was an
was
example.
on White Ave the other
Okay.
day. It's Lori Sigurdsson downtown.
Not on White Ave?
Sorry,
No, but yeah,
in,
Rachel
on-
Nutley, I think, does run for an Edmonton ride. She doesn't run
Yeah.
for Fairview.
So, like, the NDP won last time Edmonton Manning, Edmonton Castle Downs, Edmonton Northwest, St. Albert, West Henday, Glenmore, City Centre, Highlands Norwood, Decorah, Beverly, Clairview, Gold Bar, Strathcona, Riverview, and McClung, Edmonton South, Whitemud, Rutherford, Millwoods, Meadows, and Ellerslie. They did not win Sherwood Park. They did not win Edmonton Southwest. Now, Sherwood Park, you could say, okay, maybe it's not Edmonton. Edmonton Southwest with Casey Maddow was the only Edmonton seat that they did not win.
Actually, all I need to know is what sides outside Edmonton and Calgary they won last time.
Outside, they won Calgary McCall, Calgary Mountain View,
But what about outside of,
Outside,
of Edmonton and
outside
Calgary?
Calgary and Edmonton.
Lethbridge West. That's it.
Well, if there's only,
But there-
is
yeah, I mean,
that
they didn't win-
2019 or 2015?
This is 2019.
Okay, I'm looking at how they won in 2015 because if there's only 20 seats for Calgary
Well,
and 20
hold
seats
on.
for Edmonton.
Yeah, they
There's
can't
more
do-
than
if
that.
there's
There's more than
86
that.
seats,
I mean, I just named. Well, yeah, they won everything in them. So numbers 15 through 36. So yeah, about 20 odd, right? 15 to 25 is 10, 20.
Can I go to that page you put on the big screen? What is it?
This is the Wikipedia page for the Edmonton 2019 election.
But we want to talk about 2015, right?
Yeah, let's talk 2015.
Or you could talk 2015, and they should have the same background as to how many they won. Now, in 2015, if we look at it, they won 54 seats. All you need is 44.
Yeah.
Majority
so I'm just
is
wondering
44.
where they were.
So looking here, this is the map here.
And they did win a bunch of rural seats.
Yeah.
They did win in 2015.
Well, they would have had to.
So they won. They won in 2015. They won Red Deer complete. They won Lethbridge complete. They won
Yep.
Medicine Hat complete. They
Yep.
won Edmonton complete.
Yeah,
By-
all of Emden.
Yeah, they won a bunch of Calgary, but they also won like so they
One,
won
two,
Fairview,
three,
Spirit River up
four.
here.
Hang on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 rural seats.
Yeah.
And I think Alberta Party didn't win nothing.
No, like you said, the vote was split between the Progressives, the PCs, and the
Yeah.
Wild Rose. So.
Yeah. But I don't think... I mean, they could still... Yeah, they could still win. I mean, if there's...
So in response to your question, if I'm
They could still
advising
win.
if I'm advising the PCs,
Yep.
just do what you're doing, right? Because you're probably going to win.
Like a hand there's... Okay, so if we count Chestermere, Strathmore, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7...
You've got all the rural ridings, that's
10,
all you
11,
need.
12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29... 29 ridings in Calgary. If you count Strathcona, Sherwood Park, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 ridings in Edmonton. Let's say 23 because you're not going to win Morinville, St. Albert. That's not enough urban people in that riding.
I mean,
So what do we say?
it's irrelevant.
29 and 24?
Just look at all the numbers.
It's 54.
That's a majority.
Yeah. Well,
But
that's
you're not-
what their majority was in 2015, actually. I think 54
Right, but you
Yeah.
look at all the seats, look at all the rural ones, right?
Yeah, like 54.
It's because they were split between the Wild Rose and the UCP. There's no way they
No,
could
they
lose.
won. No, they would have beat anyway. They won 54 seats.
Yeah. Even if the Conservatives had swept every non-seat, it was maybe vote share is what beat them.
That's what I'm talking about.
yeah.
It's the
Yeah.
vote share. And
Yeah.
just if you scroll back down again, Steve, right? If you look at that, okay,
this
let's
one
just look at those, right? What are the combined Wild Rose and PC? Oh, look at that.
Yeah,
it
that's
beats the
50%,
NDs,
yeah. Yeah.
right?
40%.
Every case. It's just the vote splitting.
You're right.
I do not see the NDP pulling that out.
Well, in 2012, and this was the Redford election, the Conservatives had 59.5% of the popular vote. The NDP and the Alberta Party had 11.16% combined of the popular vote. In 2015, the NDP went to 40.62% of the popular vote. The Wild Rose PC were at 52.01% of popular vote. But because they split...
Those are bad comparisons because of how Redford won. Right? Because Redford should have been, by all accounts, by any measure, she should have been an NDP candidate.
She should have been, yes.
But she didn't see a road to being premier
Right.
for NDP.
Right.
So what she did is
She was
said-
a red Tory.
Not just a red Tory. She was a... What's worse than a red Tory? Like
Deep red.
like red and yellow with
Yeah.
hammer and sickle Tory,
Yeah.
right? Like because
Yeah.
she pulled in the public sector people, had
yeah.
them get conservative memberships, and then
Yeah.
essentially yoinked out,
Stab them in the back, yeah.
yoinked out, and then I guess, but
Yeah.
and then those she got the traditional NDP voter to join the Conservative Party, vote for the Conservative leadership, and then those people voted Conservative in the next election because their candidate was
Well, in 2019, the UCP got 50.02% of the popular vote. The NDP and the Alberta Party got 42.85%. Now, the Alberta Party was only 2.23% of that. So I think, they were minor. It was the NDP, of that 42%, 40.62% was NDP all by itself. But again, in both elections, 2015, 2019, the NDP could not crack 41% of popular vote. So that is definitely a challenge for them.
And
can
again,
they make the most of that 40%?
Well, that's just it, right? And the answer is probably not. Because anytime you talk about percentage of popular vote, it's like, great, except where was it all? If it's all in Edmonton and Calgary, that means you're winning, how many of your seats, does it mean you're winning a whole bunch of seats overwhelmingly, but you're failing in other seats miserably, right? What you need to be able to do is have that vote ideally split in such a way that you're making some close seats everywhere, right?
Ideally,
otherwise, because that's how you win with only 30% of the vote.
How do you do that if you're the New Democrats? How do you do that?
You don't. That's why, if this somehow manages to be a New Democrat victory, I'll be very interested to find out how that happens.
They're going to have to sweep Edmonton, sweep Calgary.
And take some rural ridings.
And take a bunch of rural.
Well,
I can't see them taking much.
You're going to have to take
There's no
at
way.
least one of Lethbridge's 4. You have to take at least one. You're going to have to take
all 4.
That
gets you 44. I guess.
They could just sweep. They could just sweep Edmonton and Calgary because we figured that was 54 votes, right?
But again, they're
54
probably
seats.
a sweep at Calgary is going to be pretty hard.
Yeah,
It's 54 for
29
Calgary
and 23. We said, right?
What's that?
29 seats in Calgary,
Yeah.
23 in Edmonton, right?
Yeah.
Because you were
That's
counting
okay. That's
more.
52.
Yeah.
Is it 52? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and if they
Okay,
only need
that's
44,
arithmetic, don't
well,
get
they
long.
only need 44.
Yeah.
So you don't need to sweep Calgary. You kind of got to take it. You got to hold Fortress Edmonton.
Yeah.
And, well, I mean, from 52 to 44, that's 6. You can afford to give up 4 in Calgary so long as you take 1 in Red Deer, 2 in Lethbridge.
Let's go back to the Calgary ones here and see what suburban Edmonton, East Central.
You can afford to do that. So, but you really got to carry the day in Calgary.
So going back to the 2015 results, looking at the Calgary ridings, there's a bunch. It was the vote splitting hurt them or helped them in Calgary.
In 2015.
Looks like they could take Calgary Buffalo.
Or sorry, 2012, I guess it's.
It's Calgary Buffalo's high income. So they could do it. They could do it.
Let's see. That would be 45 to 55. No. PCs take Calgary Cross.
I think the NDP has been
Calgary
smart.
Cume is close.
They've been very, very intelligent in talking a lot about healthcare. I think that's a very good campaign point for them. It's a traditional campaign point.
Why it's also
which
a
is
big
not
deal
great,
these days.
But it's a good one, right? Because you're always able to frighten people with the boogeyman of healthcare.
Yeah.
This is beyond the traditional messaging, though. Right now, it's the same across the country. Right now, it's about keeping emergency rooms open. And
yeah, but that's a traditional message. That's always been the situation.
But
always, healthcare has always been on the verge of collapse. Always.
It's a new message now since COVID, because of all the people leaving the sector.
I guess, I suppose, but this is what I mean. It's a good strategy, but like any traditional strategy, sooner or later, it will run out.
You're right.
And the question is when. Is it going to be this one, or is it going to be the next one, or the one after that?
Election to election, if it's a nothing burger, then people say, yeah.
Yeah, people just tune it up.
This
right?
election, it is an issue. And people, I don't know what it says in the polling you've seen, but I've seen enough articles recently to say across the country, including in Alberta, this is a big deal.
And I think it's a good strategy. It's a very good one, because that's where the NDP is always going to have, how would you say, traction.
Yeah,
they are the creators of healthcare. It's their baby, and they will always be dependent upon to. Like, no one looks at it and says, "Yeah, the NDP is not gonna fund my healthcare." No one ever thinks that.
I think the more they can stay away from, the one-tier system conversation, the better, right? You don't want to get dragged into one-tier, two-tier, because that's the message they're always going on.
What,
right?
the NDP?
Yeah, right. So, and because personally for me, and now this is just my personal opinion, I think, I have a problem with dogmatic unilateralism. Anyways,
Yeah.
If you're not able to revisit a conversation, see what's pragmatic,
Right.
because we know that there's examples all over we've talked about the social welfare states in Europe. A lot of them have two-tier systems now,
Yep.
right? So we should be able to at least
Canada,
do some calculation.
Canada is the only socialized medicine system in the world that holds people prisoner
Yeah.
to the system. Right?
Doesn't the NHS, doesn't the UK do that as well?
No, you can escape the system within the UK.
Okay. I thought the NHS
The
was
NHS
also
is universal coverage, and it's
Right.
unique because it's a national system, not a provincial system
Right.
like ours. But
You can get private.
You can still get private
Okay.
healthcare within the UK.
You can opt out.
Yep.
Right. Okay.
Actually, using NHS is 20 years ago. Was on my honeymoon in Spain.
Yeah.
My wife got chicken pox out of nowhere. So, and we had to fly to the UK and get her diagnosed
Yeah.
at University Hospital of the West Midlands. Or
Yeah. Something like that. Yeah.
And she got checked out, and sure enough, she had it. And I was like, okay, went up to the desk to the nurse to pay. 2 Canadians,
Yep.
not British at all.
Yep.
And she just laughed at me. Oh, you don't pay. You don't pay.
They didn't want your Alberta health care?
They did not want. They didn't want Alberta. I was going to pay with my
Yeah, out of
Visa
pocket.
card.
Yeah.
Right? And she was like, she looked at me like I was an idiot. Like, this is the NHS, and I don't care where you're from. You're getting
Wow.
this for free.
Wow. They didn't have a mechanism for collection.
I kind of wonder, like, it's. I mean, the British people are very fond of the NHS.
Yeah.
I have to wonder, does it function better than ours? Because
No.
ours doesn't.
No. I don't think the British people are fond of the NHS. I think they hate it. But they're more frightened.
I just say because I don't have much experience.
They're
with
more
other
frightened
than
with the
British
alternative.
media, so.
Yeah.
And that-
What are you
there's-
going to replace it with?
There's nobody here who is happy with healthcare.
Yeah.
Nobody. Even its most strident defender. Nobody likes it. We all hate waiting 8 hours to see a doctor in an emergency room, right? But what frightens people is the prospect of the unknown. Like, what's going to replace it?
Yeah.
Well, and we've got the example right across the border, right? They always pointed our wait times. We pointed the fact that your wife gets sick, you're out hundreds of thousands of dollars.
If you don't have your insurance.
Right.
Yeah, if you don't have an insurance plan. Now, this is also something that the Canadian healthcare industry stridently attempts to keep it as a binary discussion.
Yeah, it's this system or that system.
Yeah,
it's
it's
never.
only-
We can't talk
yeah.
about Switzerland. We
Yeah.
can't talk about
Yeah.
Finland.
We
can't
can't talk about
and-
South Korea. We can't talk about Japan. They want people to only think of it as either the Canadian system or the American system.
Right.
And again, that's another topic. If I was advising the NDP, I would say, okay, keep the focus on what speculation as to what kind of dystopian American-style system Danielle Smith might create.
Yeah.
Avoid talking about your record in healthcare.
Exactly. The big one, right, has always been that when Danielle Smith, when she was a radio host, talking
Yeah.
about
Alternatives to
alternative
healthcare. Yeah. Alternative delivery
specifically
systems.
the one like maybe people should pay to visit their GP.
A user fee.
Yeah, a
like
user
we used to have back in the 1980s.
Yep. Right, and like it's like because literally the line she says like a visit to your a non-emergency visit to your doctor, is that something that should be covered 100% by government?
Yeah.
And that's a view I'm actually very sympathetic to.
Most people
Right.
are.
And then-
like everybody understands that the status quo is not sustainable. That we have to do something.
Yeah.
But what that something is very much a contentious matter of debate, and people are frightened.
Yeah.
And like,
Well, paralyzed. That's just frightened. Paralyzed.
Yeah.
Like the entire
Yeah.
debate in the whole country is paralyzed.
Yeah,
about
that's just
trying
it.
to come and sustain. And we're just going to keep working, doing this until it doesn't work anymore. And when it
And
doesn't work anymore, it's going to be
it's
catastrophic.
gonna, yes.
Yeah.
And that's the problem.
Yeah.
When the wheels fall off, it is. I mean, yeah, when the end comes,
It's like-
our healthcare system will collapse utterly,
And then there's no hospitals.
and there's no
Oh
hospital.
no,
at
yes, because
all.
there's no money at all.
Yeah.
No, I
And
get
that's
that,
The
you know?
scary part.
I mean,
That's going to happen. That's inevitable.
We're seeing that across the board, and this is the third time I remember seeing it. The discussion about the debt ceiling in the U.S.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Because the background to that conversation is, okay, yeah, you need money to keep the government running. All right?
Yeah.
But this is where I'm going to agree with you guys. What are you doing to keep that under control? Because I'm not hearing that conversation. ever,
Nobody down
right?
there is doing anything.
Well, like in the Alberta situation, 45. If you look at the budget, about 45% of every penny the provincial government spends is on healthcare. About 45% is education. Everything else takes that last 10%. So when we say, well, we need more funding for healthcare,
Where's it coming from?
where's it coming from?
Yeah.
And this is where, like, again, I would advise the NDP, do not talk about your time in office. Keep the focus on the forward, on the future, because they ran up massive debts. And they weren't able to move the needle on anything in healthcare, like patient outcomes, wait times, doctors per patient, emergency room readiness. Like, it was the same problems, that has always bedeviled our system. So I would say avoid talking about, like, don't let the UCP frame the conversation in terms of, like, well, when you were in office, you didn't do any better. Avoid that. Keep it on future policy initiatives. Like, and I think they've done a fairly good job about that. Like, again, putting in, like, mentioning numbers and be specific, because that was always a criticism in the past, that it was always platitudes. And they say, no, we're going to put 7 medical students in this community in Southern Alberta. We're going to hire 100 doctors. That we're going to, make. They had some hard numbers involved on their healthcare initiatives as what's going to happen in the future, and I think that was a good move.
Well, that's absolutely a good
Yeah,
move,
I think
because
it's a good
then you can start framing that in terms of, okay, that doesn't sound like it's going to cost a lot, right? It sounds like
It sounds manageable.
Sounds
Yeah.
like we're bringing in 6 bodies.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
That sounds really good.
Yeah, it sounds
but-
incremental.
Yeah.
Not crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's good policy. The other side is, again, using your media assets to present Danielle Smith as really dislikable as a person, like the character assassination.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think that, I don't know how effective it's going to be, because sometimes negative campaigning can backfire. But I think,
that's a Canadian myth.
it's the best shot they got, though.
No,
Right?
I think
it's
that
the best
the
shot.
negative is it might backfire you. I think is the myth.
Well, it certainly seems to have more traction nowadays.
Yeah.
In a more polarized society.
Yeah.
Right. Now, will it work? That's especially in Southern Alberta. I mean, Danielle Smith was a very public figure. She had a very popular radio show.
Mm-hmm.
So the people in Southern Alberta, particularly Calgary, which is the battleground,
Yeah,
they know who she is.
her home
They
riding is
know-
Okotoks, isn't it?
Yeah, they know her personality. So you might get play in Edmonton by demonizing her.
Yeah.
Where they aren't as familiar with her. She didn't have that media presence.
But it gives them no benefit.
Yeah, but because Edmonton was already kind of
Pretty well locked down, right? Other than maybe if you gain traction in my riding here,
Yeah.
which is presently conservative.
Yeah. So, but again, they got to do something,
Yeah.
and it's not going to hurt them. So they may as well roll with that, and that way you can distract from things you don't want to talk about.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. My sense is this is just going to be another Alberta election, right? My vote is worth, half of a rural vote, as it always has been.
Well,
and which pisses
Edmonton,
me off.
Calgary alone can win it. The importance of the rural vote is really not that important anymore. I mean, when I look at there's in Northern Alberta, there's 14 seats, and then say Yeah, 37 to kind of 50, 13, 14, 13. There's less than 20 rural seats.
I don't know. We'll see.
Less than 20, 25.
I think
So
maybe
the cities are going to carry it.
maybe next time we do a postmortem.
Yeah, I think the cities can carry it. And
So
Calgary is essential because, again,
Calgary's the battleground.
yeah,
Calgary
Edmonton
is the battleground.
is going to. Now, I do think
Does it
that
hurt?
Casey Madu can keep Edmonton Southwest. I do think they can. Now, when you look at the heat maps from Edmonton Spruce Grove in the 2019 on the Wikipedia page, when you look at on the right-hand side of your screen there, Steve, pan down, you can see some heat maps.
These ones?
Is that 2015 or is that 2019?
These are 2015, yeah.
Okay, look at 2019's. If you look at the heat maps, again, the wealthier the real estate in the downtown core, the more key the NDP support. If you look at the far west and far northeast, the numbers are like the heat map is dimmer. Those seats might be in play. I'm going to guess right there. Now, if you zoom in on the Edmonton Spruce Grove map there, you see that heat map? The northeast and this west might be something in play there. So I'm going to say that maybe, and I'm happy to say why, quantify this, that I think the Conservatives can keep Casey Madu's seat, and they might take one or two more.
Which ones do you think they'll take?
Something in the West End or maybe the far northeast. The more blue-collar, working-class neighborhoods.
So like Clairview or...
Yeah, the ones that were the most hurt by the lockdowns. Nobody's talking about it, but I do think that the COVID experience is in the back of people's minds.
Yeah, but it depends on who they blame for it. I mean,
That's true.
Who
That's
can
true.
you blame? You can blame the UCP for it,
Yes.
or
Yep.
you get successfully redirected to what.
Well, it's kind
what
of like
the NDP.
who
would be.
is least likely to lock me down on the next emergency? And especially if you put it in terms of climate action, who is more likely to give me a climate lockdown? That, if you look at that angle, then I think a blue-collar seat and the Conservatives across the board are trying to portray themselves as the blue-collar party, and the NDP is unintentionally transitioning into the white-collar managerial class party.
Yeah, well, they've always been middle class / worker. I mean, that's
They have traditionally been, but they aren't that anymore.
Well, I mean, we've seen that in the U.S. as well. Like the working class has always kind of bridged, the divide between labor and conservatism, right?
But it's
for whatever reason. I find
it-
it's like knee jerk. And so we were talking earlier about the media.
Yep.
When you talk about the Sun media,
Yep.
that to me, that's aiming for the
blue collar.
the grade 4 education.
Yep.
Blue
You
collar
said it,
side of things,
I didn't.
right?
You said that.
Well, let's take it even farther. With Hillary, basket of undesirables,
yeah,
right?
Deplorables. The deplorables. Yep.
Oh,
Clingers to their guns and religion.
That
Yes.
was Obama.
Yes, but that is let's be plain.
Yeah.
The progressive vote is becoming more upper income. Again, when you look at the heat maps of the 2015 election, and then you look at property value maps, the two line up, like NDP support and higher property values line up almost perfectly.
I think you get that every once in a while. I mean, you saw this in the 70s with all the radical terrorist movements coming out. The Red Army faction, Baader Meinhof.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, those are all
Japanese
upper
Red
middle-class
Army.
movements.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
These are all just kids with time on their hands,
Right.
and
So-
and shame.
That's why I think some of the more working class areas of Edmonton might be in play. Same way, the higher income areas of Calgary could be in play for the NDP.
Well, that's why I'm thinking, it's an interesting exercise to go through right now. How would we advise? But I think that's kind of a non-starter for us on the eve of the election, right? This would have been a conversation to have 2 weeks ago.
I guess.
Right
well,
now,
or let's kind of say how we think that each party's campaign has gone. Did you guys see the debate?
Nope.
No, I don't pay attention to that.
To be honest, I don't pay attention to debates either. I don't really. I had a camping trip to go on, and that was a far higher priority for me.
Yeah.
And I don't think debates really solve anything, in that both sides, and I don't care where you are, any level, any jurisdiction, both sides. If you gave politicians an opportunity right now to say we'll never do a debate again, they'd take it.
Yeah.
Because both sides go into it looking how not to lose. They want to avoid that look in the mirror moment. They want to avoid that gotcha that can sometimes come from a debate.
And again, that's we go back to the start of our podcast today. That's kind of what I was talking about. Just everyone's looking for nothing to stick to them and something to stick to the other person, and it doesn't have to have any substance. Right? It just has to have traction,
gotcha moment.
You know? And that's part of it. And I'd argue for the three of us, we don't need to watch the debate.
We don't.
Because
no.
We get a lot more
I
going
do
up.
understand that the debate was heavily watched. That it had... now, I don't know if this is significant, but that a higher numbers of people watched the debate. That's interesting. I don't know what the significance of that is. But it's interesting. Mm-hmm. Also, the high voter turnouts.
In advanced polls?
Yes. Now, there was a massive, much higher voter turnout in 2015. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it didn't benefit the NDP. There seems to be a high voter turnout now. Now, traditionally, high voter turnouts are bad news for the incumbents. Mm-hmm. Generally speaking, lower voter turnouts tend to benefit the incumbents. However, what I'm seeing on conservative, conservative circles, is that they think high voter turnout is going to help them.
Really?
I don't know why, but they seem to believe this. What are you guys' thoughts?
Well, they might just be saying that as a smokescreen, right?
Could be.
Because
Could be.
if you know that that's the pattern, and if people hear that there's going to be high voter turnout, or that's going to help them, or if they hear that that's going to be bad for them.
Maybe.
If you're a UCP supporter and you hear two things, that there's high voter turnout, and that's not good for the UCP, you might just go, oh, well, they're not going to win, I'm going to stay home. Right? So maybe by saying out loud, you're refuting that mathematical formula.
You're push polling, in a way. You're kind of push polling.
And then just go, well, maybe I'm going to go out and vote.
I don't know.
But
it's going to be interesting.
Again, one of the reasons I say the three of us probably don't watch debates is because, we've got certain approaches to life and thinking and philosophy and
we're
stuff
already
like that,
informed
because
on the issues, and we already know the platforms of each party. So it's not really telling us we didn't already know. I think the only thing that we might get out of a debate is say, okay, is highly subjective shit.
Yeah, it's who looked like a schmuck and who didn't.
Yeah, who looked perhaps more measured, who had the better diction, who had, say, the better poise. And again, this is subjective.
Well, yeah, but it's down to, because where I was going with this is what's always blown my mind is to hear that, it's all about the money spent. It's all about the advertising dollars. That's what catches people, right? And
well, I don't know.
I've never felt that. And
sometimes
people
not.
vote. People want to vote for someone they think is going to win because that makes them a winner. And to me, that is so
I don't know.
counterintuitive.
Do you believe that? Do you believe that? I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's true.
From a Pop Psych 101 point of view, I do believe it. Once I heard that, I was like, yeah, you know what? I can see that. And I think we see that playing out in the States regarding, like just Trump's base right now. That's what they love because they can't step away from him, because if they do, they're having to admit that the reasons for supporting them are now. Yeah, if you start going, he's actually kind of an ugly guy.
Well,
and then you're saying I shouldn't have been supporting him all along, and people can't deal with that. So do I buy it? Yeah, I think at least 51% versus 49%. Yes, I think that's accurate, right? And I've always had a problem with that, right? Because when I go to vote, it's on the one hand, objectively, it's because I'm platform leader candidate, right? Parties in there, but
that kind of goes to a platform, doesn't it?
Yeah, but the platform can vary from year to year, especially at the federal level, right? But then the other thing is, if I think that my candidate that I prefer is looking to lose, then that's when I definitely get out and vote.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because you think your vote matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it might be
whole
opposite.
concept,
Yeah, it turns out on its head. I was trying to think, what vote base is more scared of losing? And
Probably the Conservatives.
I would think,
yeah.
yes. Because if I'm a progressive voter, I at least have the foil of the federal government,
yeah.
right? That will act as a check on the power of Edmonton.
Yeah.
Whereas if I am a UCP supporter, if I'm or a UCP, Wild Rose, that kind of right of center supporter, I am terrified of a Notley government in Edmonton paired with the Trudeau government in Ottawa.
Yeah.
That scares me to my core because I've seen it. It happened through, when was Trudeau elected? 2016?
2015.
Was he? Because the New Democrats were 2015. Wasn't Trudeau 16?
He was before. He was already in on not like the.
I think it might have been the other way around, or it was later the same year. But but because Trudeau's famous quote was, "Why 50% cabinet female? Because it's 2015."
Oh, yeah, okay. So, they might have been like same kind of year, and we saw that right up until 2019 with. Those were not good times for the province. It decimated the economy. So I think that if you are already leaning towards a UCP kind of right of center vote, you're highly motivated. You are highly motivated.
Well, for me personally, there's the Alberta Firearms Act or whatever that they're trying to pass, right?
Gun owners are very concerned because the NDP is 100% behind the federal firearms initiative.
Yep.
That was a major issue in why I am not voting for my NDP MLA, who I have voted for in the past, because in spite of my differences with the NDP as a party, I have always liked her job as an MLA. I thought she was a superb MLA. And if she was running as an independent, I would vote for her over the Conservative candidate.
Right.
It's just that I cannot, her party is just, after COVID, when they were hard lockdown, recreate East Germany, that really frightened me. And then how they are foursquare behind public disarmament.
Yeah.
That really, really frightens me. So I can't, I really like her as a member, and I like the work that she does, and I think she's a really good person. But it's just that her party and the policies of her party are too harmful to me, to our society, that I can't vote for her.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would.
But personally, she's a nice person.
She's a great person. She's a hard worker. She's
it sounds like even on a number of
she's great in committee.
Yeah,
a number of different issues you would probably support her as well. But this one is kind of the deal breaker.
Those two, those two.
Okay,
yeah, they are that big to me.
Well, that is very, very interesting to learn. Good on you.
With and actually, with regard to the Firearms Act, Runkle the Bailey put out a good video comparing the Alberta law to the Saskatchewan law.
Oh, Oh, that would have been interesting.
And
Like, he has good content. It's just his delivery is so dry. God, I have a hard time standing.
and I was like, get a goddamn haircut. Like, what? Why do you think stringy gray hair is a good look for you? Right?
But at any rate,
you don't want to wear your wigs. But anyway,
when you said dry, I was going to say, is it like reading the Communist Manifesto? And then you started saying stringy gray hair. It's like, is that like reading the Communist Manifesto?
Kinda, yeah,
pretty much,
kinda,
yeah. But anyway, he compared. He's like you say, compared the Alberta Act to the Saskatchewan Act, and the Saskatchewan Act is so much better written than the Alberta Act is.
Yeah.
It's so much more comprehensive.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, because the Saskatchewan Act. So both of them introduce basically regulations. They create this category of person called seizure agents.
right.
And then they and a seizure agent can be anyone. It can be a law enforcement member, or it can be a private business acting in concert with the government, or acting as an agent for the government. The Saskatchewan law essentially makes it so you will lose huge amounts of money if you're a private entity who wants to act as a seizure agent.
Yeah.
For the government, right? Like,
Whereas the Alberta legislation does not.
is not comprehensive enough. So the Saskatchewan Act, the big thing about the Saskatchewan Act is it requires the seizure agents to create a storage facility that's somewhere that basically cannot exist within a major metropolitan area. So like in Saskatchewan, they couldn't put one in Saskatoon because it has to be like a kilometer from a school, a kilometer from a restaurant, a kilometer from a church.
Nowhere. Yeah.
Basically in the middle of nowhere. It's got to be managed or manned 24 hours a day.
Yep.
No seizure agent can work alone.
Right.
Okay, and then
So you mean you got high labor costs.
So it imposes high labor costs, and then it imposes registration and licensing costs and training costs, and it just makes it like
it just makes it
so even the government
expensive.
so the government to do even the RCMP to do this will have to comply with this in Saskatchewan.
Yeah.
So they'll have to incur all
Gonna
these costs, but they're the
blow their
government.
budget.
Yeah.
Then what's the point in doing it? Just to look like you're doing something? Like, what's the point in putting this law in place if it's just going to make it onerous?
Really impossible for the federal government to seize firearms.
Yeah.
Or extremely.
Okay, so this is a Saskatchewan bill pushing back against.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a Saskatchewan provincial bill. So if you want to seize firearms in the province of Saskatchewan,
This is how you
have
have to do it in our province.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If you're going to seize firearms, you have to. Yeah, and you have to have insurance, and every person has to be bonded, and all this stuff. Like it's.
So when you say the Alberta bill, is that NDP proposed bill or
No, it's a conservative bill.
The UCP bill.
The UCP bill.
Yeah.
So, it's not nearly as comprehensive as the Saskatchewan bill is much.
Now, as for the conservative talking points, for example, I know I've got some literature samples. And the NDP stuff is, aside from like the hard numbers that they had on healthcare, again, it has to, stay kind of platitude. Like, ensure Alberta remains strong, economic strategy, create jobs, drive billions new investment, build a better future, hire more teachers, build new schools. This sort of, it's kind of vague. It's more intention and platitude. Whereas the conservative stuff here is, and again, I think I can't help but think this is Daniel Smith running this show here. Like, this is smart.
Or her campaign people.
How they're trying to target the radical side of the NDP, where they've got some pretty woke comments by 4 NDP candidates. And like, for example, Rod Loyola, I don't know why the NDP carries that guy. That dude. Well, maybe. I guess I know why. Because it hasn't bitten him in the ass yet. Mm-hmm. But man, that dude is a walking liability. Like, he is pretty radical.
So what did he say?
Oh, just he's marched in Communist Party marches and Communist Organization marches. They caught him quoted as saying, an EPS badge gives you the right to beat up citizens and not face criminal charges. Like, he's pretty anti-police. Mm-hmm. And they've got 4 quotes from, some NDP candidates who are, they were affiliates them with the whole defund the police kind of type movement, that came up 2-3 years ago. I think that's pretty good strategy. That's very good. How they're promoting how they have a plan for dealing with crime on public transit. Because again, even NDP supporters I know are concerned about the violence on, or like the degradation on public transit. And this is kind of a gap in NDP electioneering. Like this is kind of a gap in their campaign.
Well, that becomes a real problem.
That
right?
can be
Like,
exploited, and I think the UCP has done a good job of exploiting it.
like if you're the party that extols the virtues of public transportation,
Yeah.
but public transportation is miserable
unsafe.
or
Yeah.
uninhabitable,
Yeah.
right? Like, because that's a big quality of life issue. Right?
It is,
Like,
yeah.
it's one thing. Okay, you can enhance people's quality of life by increasing their access to public transportation, but it's got to be.
And it's a climate issue.
You got to make
right.
it
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, you have to make it safe
But
because
the
that's your
simple quality of life
those are your
is, yeah.
constituents.
And also, you're not just, I'm going to make this better for you. So I'm going to force you to use it.
yeah.
And that's kind of where we're going. We are mandating public transit.
Because a lot of my opinions on public transit now, or at least the experience of riding public transit, come from like spending some time in Paris and using the Paris public transit system, which works pretty well. It's a lot of access. It's a lot of, and I thought this is a really good. And I was sitting on the train a lot. I'm like, this system works really well. The trains are on time. It's moving a lot of people. It's getting a lot of use, and everyone I see in here is absolutely miserable. Right? Like nobody's smiling. Everybody's happy.
Yeah.
The women are kind of scared.
Yeah.
And this is a system that's working well.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of margin for errors to lower that quality of life, right? Like,
What's the phrase? If riding public transit doesn't inspire you to improve your station in life, nothing will.
yeah. Well, I mean, like I called the bus the loser cruiser for years, right?
Yeah.
Like I rode my bicycle.
Yeah.
I mean,
The loser cruiser.
it
But I mean, okay,
it probably
so
hurt my social life for a long time, but I rode my bicycle everywhere just because I did not want to take the bus.
I don't know anyone
as a
who
teenager.
actually likes riding the bus.
if you want to get elected, do not use that term for public transit.
The loser cruiser.
Yeah.
Or
Well, if you want to get elected in Edmonton, certainly
do
don't.
not use it. Or let's put it this way: say if I'm a conservative candidate, do not use it publicly, but encourage all of my people, like a guerrilla marketing campaign,
Yeah.
to get that word on the street, to get the public using it.
Yeah.
Loser cruiser.
Well, I think
that's
you've,
brilliant.
you've definitely hit on something that, because
The loser cruiser. That's
Yeah.
good. That's good. Because it is.
if the UCP is making a law and order issue out of it, that's their domain.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Right?
Yeah. In the
But-
same way that healthcare should be for the ND.
If
for
the
NDs.
NDs aren't addressing it, and now we're talking public transit, which is
Their domain.
ND,
Yeah.
this is their constituency who are having to take public transit because they can't afford a vehicle, and
Or-
it's already a shitty transit system.
Is it their constituency?
In a lot of ways, it is.
I think their constituency
it's
is
poten-
definitely the people who see it as a moral virtue.
There's that too.
Yeah.
But that's the climate side of things.
I
But
don't think even
And that's their constituency.
I don't think even in Edmonton that many voters, other than maybe the most hardcore downtown workers, are really motivated by public transit at all in Edmonton, because the public transit system is pretty horrible.
It is. It is. But
Like-
the
Oh, yeah,
downtown
I mean,
workers
there's-
are a key NDP constituency.
Yeah,
my whole life in Edmonton, which is 40 odd years now,
Yeah.
45 almost, the thinking around public transit has been screwed.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah, it's relied far too much on buses and not enough
Yeah.
on trains, because trains are expensive.
Well, and it's relying on making a
especially
profit,
subways. Yeah.
right?
Well,
It's instead of figuring out, okay, there is a way to take a loss on transit but improve the economic efficiencies of the city.
That's a bit of an understatement, though, because public transit hemorrhages money. It's such a massive cost. It can bankrupt cities. Look at Detroit. Public transit was one of the key things that bankrupted Detroit. And you look at some American cities in California, like Stockton, Los Angeles, the cities that are bleeding money. One of the biggest problems they have, or Chicago, one of the biggest problems they have is out of control costs on their public transit. So yeah, it can be really, really, you can really get in big trouble as a city by putting too much emphasis on public transit, or by not keeping those costs in control. So I can see why they're trying to find a way
absolutely.
to make it a little more, to make it a little less of a loss leader. But again, that's really hard to do, especially because for the political forces that really advocate for public transit tend to do so out of an ideological perspective, in that it represents things to them far more than just moving people from A to B, right? It's, for example, Jan Reimer, with her views, was that public transit should be free, without looking at, say, the consequence then that it became a rolling homeless shelter.
Yeah.
And the problems with safety, public safety on it. That if you had more, if you said, no, we're not going to make it free. In fact, we're going to make public transit a little bit more expensive. It'd be far safer. It would be. It would be cleaner. It would be. You wouldn't have urine and feces in our stations.
Exactly. We don't
You'd
want
have all of this.
But the whole point of a public transit
But it kind of
system
defeats
is
that
public
idealistic
transit.
point of public transit, right?
Yeah, so we've looked at it, and I think I've used this example before. When we were in Gotham, I was in Gothenburg two years in a row.
Yeah.
I could not believe the transit system there. I fell in love with it. I could get anywhere in that city,
Yep.
basically within 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And I was living on one edge of town.
And you know what's
right?
really remarkable about those systems is how they've done so much with subways.
Yeah.
They're digging on solid rock. Okay? We are sitting on 70 feet of dirt.
Yeah.
And we say, oh, it's too expensive
And
to do subways.
the city of Edmonton used to have its own tunnel boring machine.
Yeah. Yeah.
It used to have, and it
that is
should have
such an example
of like the early
short-sightedness.
1980s. It's a crime how long it took to get the subway to the university.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because that didn't happen until the late 90s.
Now, if I can, if I can drag out my familiar boogeyman, the union protecting, or the union that covers public transit, wanted to protect bus drivers because for every train, every LRT puts 9 bus drivers out of work.
I bet, yeah.
And not to mention the maintenance and support workers who the mechanics and techs who service those buses.
Well, and the trains that we've built in the last since the millennium have essentially been because they're basically all surface right of ways, and they don't have right of ways. They're running alongside parallel
cars.
They're street cars.
And there's a reason why every other major city in the world got rid of streetcars 70 years ago.
Yeah, they're basically streetcars.
Yeah,
right?
but being able to go back 70 years, right? You're right. You use the metro. I look at the tube system in London, and I love it.
Yes.
Because once you get to know that system,
far and away superior system.
Right? You can get around London in like no time whatsoever and just pop your head up like a little fucking gopher. It's just wherever you want to be.
Yeah.
You just have to figure out how to do it. But those tunnels were dug in a time where it was basically said, okay, this neighborhood here, okay, you're going to live somewhere else because this neighborhood ain't going to exist in 2 days.
But still, it's worth. Subways are far and away the better way to run public transit.
No kidding. Like, okay, so
the technology exists for us to have the new city, the River Line. Is that what it's called? The technology existed to put that thing underground the entire way to the south end of the city.
The reason why we don't is municipal incompetence.
Yeah.
Well, I shouldn't say incompetence. It's separate agendas. Again, public transit, to its staunchest advocates, is not about transit.
Efficiency, yeah.
It's not about moving people from A to B. It's about accomplishing other social engineering guidelines, and then a whole bunch of other lobby groups and rent seekers pile their interests onto it. So then when we asked for a pony, we got a camel.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. So you couple what you just said there with what you said a couple of minutes ago about the union not wanting 9 drivers per hour.
Or wanting to protect the bus apparatus. Because it was more labor intensive.
To me, this is a complete failure of leadership because, what you need to do is have a holistic vision and how to address all of those concerns at the same time.
But you're asking these guys to, if I'm a union boss, man, my career depends on my having 10,000 people in my union.
Yeah.
If it goes down to 1,000 people in my, like if I'm running, well, maybe not 10,000 people, like say probably, in the Edmonton local, probably I'm looking at what, 6,000, 7,000 people. Okay. That means I am important enough to command a $250,000 a year salary as head of that union.
Yeah.
Well, if that union now goes down to 1,100 people.
But it's not. Right? You say,
if
okay,
it goes down, if we bring in technology that drastically improves the quality of public service, and drastically improves the level of transit, but cuts my labor costs by 90%.
Yeah, but it's not dropping it by 90%.
Let's say it did. Let's say it dropped it by 75%. Let's say it even dropped it by 50%. You don't need me and my $250,000 a year salary. So forget it.
One train took 9 buses off the road. All right.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you're replacing 100% of your buses with trains. Right. You're not going to 10% workforce. Right. It's just you're happening to put a few trains on the road.
Reducing my workforce.
Right.
It's still reducing my number of guys paying union dues.
Again, there's a way to do the math to say, this is what I'm saying. This is where the leadership can. So let's have the conversation. Let's resolve. Let's talk to the social engineers and say, okay, we get where you're coming from, right? Let's talk to the union. We get where you're coming from. Here's where I'm coming from. I also want the people of my city to be able to move around efficiently. Right.
Yeah.
So let's have all this conversation. So just off the top of my head, and I'm just going to throw, just off the top of my head, an example.
Yeah.
It's saying, okay, 9 of your bus drivers are going to lose jobs, but I'm putting in, one train.
Yeah.
Right. And we're going to have more trains in the future. So, maybe we'll cut down on the intake for the next 5 years and we find homes for your 2 guys until the next few trains are up and running, yada, yada, yada. Right? You don't have to.
How can you be more efficient though? If your number one cost is labor, in any enterprise, there are only 2 costs: materials, labor. Mm-hmm. Well, when the system's already built, your costs are all like 95% labor.
So you build it around.
So how do you make it more efficient if you're not going to reduce your labor costs?
Okay, so
and in fairness, cities like Detroit, like Chicago, took that view. We will protect. We will have no reductions in labor force. And then they bankrupted themselves with these massive payrolls and pension costs that they couldn't cover.
So let's take the union rep aside, who's making $250K a year based on the size of the union.
Yeah.
I'm just going to set him aside for the moment. Right? Now you start planning around your redundancy rate. So how many are retiring? Mm-hmm. How many are being phased out? How many can you buy out?
Yeah.
Right? You build your plan around that. I'm going to need X amount of trains. I'm expanding up to West Edmonton Mall. We're doing the Valley Line.
What's the most efficient labor force I can get?
What becomes our labor numbers?
Yeah.
Right? And build it around that.
Okay.
Now, Buddy, he's like, okay, well, now my constituency's gone down.
Yeah.
But,
he's going to fight you tooth and nail because you're taking, as Dave Chappelle says, you're getting between him and his paper. You are an existential threat to him and everything he represents.
Well, you know what?
He's not going to cooperate with you, man.
That's up to the union. Right? That's up to the union membership. It's like, listen, you guys, we can keep all of you. Mm-hmm. Right? And this is how we're going to do it. Or we can lose 1 in 10 of you so that this guy gets to keep the same salary that he's got. Right?
That's not how the narrative will be framed.
Yeah, I'm
right?
pretty sure that's. I mean, you might frame it that way,
even if it's really the issue, but it's not how the narrative's going to be framed.
I get it. All right. Yeah. So, like I said, just off the top of my head, there are conversations that can be had that can meet all 3 needs. Right.
In theory, I would agree with you. In practice, I don't.
Well, in practice, we see it every day.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen.
Right. Like, I used to live in Royal Gardens. Yeah. 111th Street pisses me off. Mm-hmm. Right. Because there's only there are two and a half exits from that.
Yeah.
You can go on to 40th, which had a fucking bike lane.
Yeah.
You can go through Lord Byron, right, which is one-way speed bumps.
Who was that guy in the National Post who wrote about the line going to Nate and the boondoggle,
the absolute disaster of
like the switching system. Yeah, exactly. And what were the words he used? Gawk or marvel at the ineptitude. Gawk at the incompetence.
Oh, it blows my mind.
And that's still that's still messed up. Isn't it?
That's still terrible.
Oh, yeah, it's and then
They've
what
made
did we have
entire
recently?
sections of the city undrivable.
Yeah.
And I think that was intentional in some
probably.
small way.
Oh,
Like it was a part of the goal.
Because it's interesting. If you look at the Edmonton train system versus the Calgary train system,
Yeah.
right? Edmonton train system, the original parts
The
of it.
original parts were
Right.
far and away better.
Yeah. So downtown, it's subsurface.
Oh, it was
And
brilliant.
then the original surface system was Clearview, but it had its own right of way.
Yeah,
So
'cause it
it's
used
not
existing rail line.
use existing rail lines. So it's not having to deal with traffic lights.
Or it wasn't as disruptive.
Yeah.
It was still disruptive, but
Yeah.
not as disruptive.
Yeah, because it was like, the boom comes down, the street's closed, and then boom, the train's gone, and then you're on. So it's a 30-second
Yeah,
disruption.
it wasn't
opposed to-
as bad.
Oh,
And
yeah,
then-
it's not like the 5 minutes you have to wait at White Mud and 111. I mean, that's
it's ridiculous. And then Calgary's downtown system, the trains are streetcars
Yep.
Yeah.
downtown. But as soon as they're out of downtown, they're on their own right of way.
Yep.
So Calgary's system is more disruptive downtown, but less disruptive once it's away from downtown. And I think is probably a vastly better functioning system.
Well, I would say that again, both systems, I condemn both of them because of their reliance on streetcars.
Yeah.
Edmonton had the right idea at the beginning to put it underground.
Yeah.
And it was just a scandalous failure of vision and leadership
Yeah.
to not continue that initiative and just, they extended the tunnels underground to Government Center.
Yeah.
It was just, I don't know, just a tragedy and a lost opportunity that they did not. I mean, look at the experience of Toronto, where the sentiment against LRT is so massive now because how they just drastically expanded streetcars everywhere and so infuriated and alienated public support for public transit. Whereas if they had just bit the bullet and put it underground, you could have a system like London. You could have a system like Göteborg. You could have a system like Berlin.
Yeah.
You could have a system like New York.
Well, the funny thing is, Berlin and Göteborg both have S-Bahns, right?
Yeah.
Göteborg is only
cool.
S-Bahn.
Yeah. If you had an elevated train system, that would be okay.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, right? You can go up or you can go down, but on the
Street
ground
level
is
is
the worst place
Well,
for
no,
it.
Gothenburg is on the ground.
Yeah.
It absolutely is. You got buses and you got trams. In fact, they limit the number of cars that can come into town every day. I think it's a rotating cycle, or you have to have a special license.
Oh, God.
But like a congestion charge like London does probably.
Yeah.
But it's not congested because
Well, of
everyone's-
course not. If you forbid people from doing it, if you make it impossible for all but the wealthiest people to drive in the city, you're going to have fewer people driving in the city.
No, what I'm saying is the transit system is so good you can get around. You don't need a car,
Well,
right?
maybe.
And the trains in and out of town are also very good.
How
as
do you
well.
how do you like move things? Like how do you move? You got to move. If you can't have a car, how do you move?
I don't know. You can probably get a permit. Like I don't know everything.
Or
right?
what do you
But
do like for groceries?
Groceries, you can take them on the bus.
Yeah, but
That's what we
if I
do.
don't have the trunk in my car. Now
Yeah,
I
but
gotta go to
you're
the
thinking
grocery
like a
store
North American here.
Yeah,
Whether
but
you-
now I got to go to the grocery store every 2 or 3 days. My time has a financial value.
and there's a grocery store within a 10-minute walk.
Yeah, and so now I have to spend like I'm serious about this.
Mm-hmm.
Now my time is being taken away from me because I am continually 3 times a week shuttling back and forth to the grocery store because I am limited in what I can buy to small retail quantities. I can't take part in bulk buy like a warehouse store. I can't lower my grocery costs with that.
Oh my God! I can't
Yes,
believe
it's
we're going
legit.
here.
No, it is legit.
Costco's a thing.
Costco is a thing. Why do you think it's so successful? Because it saves people money.
No,
But
actually,
but when
Costco is
autocrats-
also a bourgeois thing.
it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. It saves people money.
Doesn't save the poor money
you say
because they can't
bourgeois.
afford to buy there at all.
Doesn't matter. It saves some people money.
Yeah, it's the inherent leftist in me. I had to throw bourgeois in once.
And the autocrat who says, no, I'm going to take away your mobility. I'm going to take away your autonomy. I am going to inflict that
Okay.
pedestrian lifestyle on you, whether you like it or not.
I'm just talking about the efficiency of the transit system in Gothenburg.
This was all very efficient in other countries. East Germany had very efficient public transit.
I doubt that. I don't believe it did.
Well, no, it didn't. Of course not. Autocracies are never efficient.
Well, no. Mussolini did make the trains run on time.
Mention that. Yeah, Mussolini made the trains run on time. So yeah,
it's about the only thing he did. But.
Dictatorships are always efficient from the dictator's point of view. But let's go back to the election.
All right.
Let's go back to the election. I do think using new media to bypass gatekeepers, because again, traditional legacy media will not report this kind of type stuff. They don't. They avoid it. I think that's an effective use, or not an effective use. I think that is a new strategy, and something new we're seeing from conservative politics that we haven't seen before.
I will say this: I do not see a lot of calling out of woke extremism on mainstream media.
No,
right? Because
they don't report it.
Because it's just dangerous to do. Right?
They don't want to.
It just raises shitstorms, even with discussing whether they want to or not.
I mean, right-wing media does it.
Right.
The Sun will do it. Absolutely, they will do it. But they don't have the widespread market share. And again, this is what I'm talking about, disproportional impact. Mm-hmm. When you get one guy, for example, what was his name? He became kind of a liability, so stop talking about him. But that Artur Pawlowski, that radical, unhinged, fundamentalist zealot preacher.
Oh, yeah. The guy that got arrested all the time.
Yeah, they were trying to, the legacy media was trying very hard to associate him with Danielle Smith. Mm-hmm. I mean, they went over and above. Like, that was a favorite storyline until it became, he started also, he just went nuts. And he's going after, and he's talking about how he hates Smith. Mm-hmm. Well, it's okay, that's of no value anymore, so they dropped the story.
Well, okay.
But the media, because like that 80-20 split, mm-hmm. when you've got guys like Global and the CBC who want to leap on any possible connection between right-wing fanaticism and the conservatives, and when the Sun tries to attach left-wing fanaticism to the NDP, it's a very disproportionate effect. So how effective it's going to be to use new media for that is going to be interesting.
That's the question.
Yeah.
Right. So that's when it comes to our postmortem on this.
Yeah.
I'm very curious to see how the new media fits into it.
Or I don't know what we'll use for a metric though, because it's going to be hard to measure. I mean, let's say the Conservatives get a shit pile of seats. How will we tease out the cause and effect relationships? I
think in one respect, at least, like there's a very broad respect, mm-hmm. if you're attributing new media mm-hmm. to their current campaign and their foregoing of traditional media to their current campaign, if they pull it off, that will say something unto itself.
Yeah. Right? Just to what extent, we don't know.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of punditry after the fact. We should be able to get hold of this.
So, okay, boys. Predictions. Bold and fearless predictions.
I predict UCP.
Okay, so right now, as it stands right now, 63 seats for the PCs.
Okay.
24 for the New Democrats.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
That's what it is right now. Mm-hmm. What do you think is going to be Monday night?
Probably those numbers.
You think about the same?
I don't think we're going to see any surprises. I think this is, I'm betting that roughly mirrors what happened in 2019. Yep. I think the big difference right now is, the only thing that really made the difference in 2015 and was shored up by 2019 was the split with the Wild Rose. Mm-hmm. And that's yet again not here. So no mm-hmm. surprises. NDP might make some modest gains just based on healthcare mm-hmm. And its current state mm-hmm. because it's in a crisis that is actually a crisis.
What's NDP got in Calgary right now? How many seats have they got in?
You need to go back to 2015.
Yeah,
You had
do
2015.
I
You just
have
need to
that?
go back, right?
I have that up on there. So they got 3 in Calgary.
right now, 2019.
They got 3 in Calgary right now. I cannot help but think they're going to increase their totals in Calgary.
I don't think their gains are going to be substantial. I certainly don't think they're going to be enough to take government.
I can see,
Is that 3 or 4 in Calgary?
all the polling is say even.
I think they're gonna increase in Calgary, but I don't know if they're gonna increase enough to get them over the line.
Yeah, like I can see them adding maybe 3 more. I can see them going from 3 to 6, maybe 3 to 7.
That's not enough.
I wouldn't say I think I could see, like you said, what is 63 and what right now?
63 and 24.
Yeah, see, I could see the Conservatives falling to like 55.
And most
63.
and here's the thing, most of the conservative pundits are predicting that.
Yeah.
They're saying going down to 55, but I don't really know what the source of momentum is for the New Democrats. Because the economy,
I think it depends on the success of painting Daniel Smith as kind of a villain.
as evil, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the economy in Alberta has been better than, like, everywhere is suffering. Like, we're in a national recession.
Yeah.
Everywhere is kind of suffering. But Alberta is doing better than most.
Yeah.
Usually does. The only time it hasn't was is since 14, 15 with the oil drop.
Yeah, we've been protected by good commodities prices and a low tax environment. So we've been protected by that.
Yeah.
So that usually helps and again, that usually creates low turnout.
And the Ukraine war is definitely helping commodity prices. In
Yes,
all the
yes.
commodities.
Oh, yes,
Right.
yes.
Alberta as a substitute
Absolutely.
for Ukraine is.
That usually helps the incumbent. Like, again, like, people aren't as motivated to get out against the government.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not aware of any real major unpopular act like a goods and services tax.
Yeah.
Or I'm trying to think.
Well, I saw NDP ads were not promising lower taxes too, right?
She has been, but I think they were doing okay on that. But then they released, again, this was dumb. I don't know why they did this. Talking about how they wanted to jack the corporate tax again.
Yeah.
That was dumb. That was the dumbest thing going, because the UCP has really made traction on that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Chamber of Commerce came out and said, this is a bad idea. We're going to lose investment. I mean, like they did last time, they jacked corporate tax 20 points. There was a flood of out investment. Like, that was dumb. I don't know why
because can the NDP help themselves from trying to play into that greedy corporation sentiment, right?
I mean,
and then the corporations come out and make a nuanced argument, or the private sector comes out and makes a nuanced argument about how this might actually hurt your cost of your job.
They could have, except that got ruined in 2015.
Yeah.
Because they did try it. We had a massive outpouring of reverse investment. Mm-hmm. The economy tanked. And it wasn't just because of the oil prices. Everybody understood that, because Saskatchewan was dealing with the exact same oil prices and outperformed Alberta in every single metric.
Yeah.
And that was always the point. I mean, that was the problem, that you had Saskatchewan right next door.
Yeah.
And they weren't suffering nearly as badly.
Yeah, but gas, oil and gas isn't as big a thing there. It's more the natural gas right there.
Still.
No, Saskatchewan is the country's largest heavy oil exporter.
Yeah,
the entire southern half of
Yeah.
southern half of the province, south of Regina. Well, it's not southern, but south of Regina is a massive heavy oil field.
I mean, Saskatchewan has really moved into oil and gas since the Saskatchewan Party took over. They've really opened up that sector.
It's centered around Estevan, but it's basically everything south of Regina. And I mean, of course, and there's lots of oil that feeds into Lloydminster as well. There's a big, huge field around there. So it's those are old fields. They're not new developments, right? Yeah. They just exploited them.
Yeah, they're just generally being opened up.
Yeah.
And again, they were heavy to tax. They pretty much increased every single tax in the Alberta catalog. Mm-hmm. And again, I don't think that's been forgotten. And it's just that the corporate tax is one that people instantly remember. It comes to mind. And they're saying, ooh, there are consequences to doing that.
Yeah.
businesses will relocate, or they just won't increase investment. They won't expand. They won't create new jobs. So that was pretty poor. Again, if I put my campaign manager hat on, I would have said to them, okay, you keep that shit in the low ground. It wouldn't have been a big deal if they got elected and then they bumped the corporate tax in their first 30 days in office. They would have had another 3.5 years.
Here's a problem. Here's a problem with that. Just
I know what you're going to say.
Problem. No, you don't.
Okay.
None of them serve in the army, so none of them know what the low ground is. So.
Okay. Just keep that to yourselves. And if you're going to bump it up very early on, so you got 3.5 years to do damage control.
Yeah.
Now, there's no guarantee you will succeed because they didn't in 2019.
Yeah.
They bit them in the ass hard. But whatever you're going to do, if you got to jump the corporate tax, do not talk about it. Like, deny it during the campaign. Say, no, we're not doing it. Day 3 in government, we're doing it.
And when you do it, hide it on page 4,957 of the budget.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Don't let it get dragged out into the open.
Yeah.
That was a major strategic error.
Yeah.
Like that was bad idea. Bad idea.
I think it's all nothing burgers. They can't win. They're not going to.
I think.
Well, having looked, I didn't realize before we looked at it. Having looked at the 2015 results and the amount of damage that the vote splitting did to the Conservatives.
Like, I don't see how they can, because I don't see
unless
the issue.
Unless they take both major cities.
I don't
need to take all the urban vote.
Yeah.
I don't see a major gaffe that was made by Smith. From what I can glean, the debate was a saw-off. Nobody, if anything, the Conservatives were feeling really good about the debate performance. Yeah. So at least that tells me, like, the NDP was kind of like, nah. Like, from what I'm seeing from their sources, they're saying nothing burger.
Yeah.
And the Conservatives were feeling energized. So there's no food for the NDP vote in there.
Yeah.
There's not a bad economy.
Too many rich people in Calgary are rich because of resource extraction, right? And they know where that bread's
Well, it's their kids, though, who inherited that wealth, who are the NDP constituency. But again, there's nothing for them. There's no real red meat for those guys.
Yeah.
Right? The economy is not going bad, which is a big predictor in a change of government.
That's always bad.
There's no major unpopular say policy move like Merkel's refugee policy, or say like Brexit, or the GST, or some singular act of government, which a single issue question which can bring down a government that was otherwise probably didn't have anything to worry about. No big gaffe. I just don't see what can really.
Not enough can go wrong for the Tories.
There's nothing to really animate people against them.
No, this is the Tories to lose, and they're not going to lose.
And when I look at the vote, like, when I start seeing 45% splits in traditional polls, you always have to account for the silent conservative. So you always got to bump up the conservative vote, like from what is published in mainstream media, like the Ipsos poll, the Abacus polls, all of those. You have to bump conservative 5, drop progressive 5. There's a hidden 10% split in there. And then when I see that, instead of going from 45-45, I'm back to 2019 with a 50-42.
Yeah.
Instead of 45 each, one's at 50, one's at 40.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say 58 seats for the Conservatives. And I'm going to say that those other 6 seats in around Calgary, maybe, I'm going to say 58 to say 28. I'm going to pick the NDP to gain 4.
It's 58-29.
Yeah.
Right?
No, the NDP is going to have to gain more, because I can see the Conservatives losing a net 5 and the NDP gaining 5. But that said, I do think there's going to be a flip in Edmonton. I think the Conservatives are going to gain. They're going to hold their seat. They're going to gain another one. And I'll pick the NDP to hold on to their Lethbridge seat. And then the rest of the flips will be, the primary change will be in Calgary, but not enough to compensate for their failure to gain a toehold in any of the other urban areas,
Right.
and to compensate for the loss of those 2 Edmonton seats. That's my fearless prediction.
All right, then. Tune in next time.
When we
Yeah.
see how wrong we were.
We'll see how wrong we were.
NDP majority.
Thanks, everybody.
Might happen. Hey, Maggie said he'll eat 2 hats if it don't happen. So